Hill, where FBI Director James Comey testified on the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email. This hearing of the House Judiciary Committee is about 4 hours.
Good morning. The Judiciary Committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. We will welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on oversight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Before I begin this hearing, I want to take a few minutes to recognize the Chief Counsel of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations, Caroline Lynch. After 15 years working on Capitol Hill, Caroline has decided to move back to her home state of Arizona to be close to her family and to pursue the next steps in her career. Needless to say, we are very sad to see Caroline go. During her time in Washington, D.C., Caroline worked for Representative John Shadegg, both in his personal office and as chief counsel of the House Republican Policy Committee. In 2006, Caroline came to work for the House Judiciary Committee, and in 2008, she became chief counsel of the Judiciary Committee's Crime Subcommittee. At the committee, Caroline has had an enormous impact on the reform of our criminal and national security laws. Few people in Washington have done as much to promote the safety of our communities. Caroline has overseen the drafting, negotiation, and passage of critical legislation regarding the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, and the most sweeping set of reforms to government surveillance practices in nearly 40 years, the USA Freedom Act, among many other priority legislative initiatives. Anyone who has met Caroline knows she is immensely intelligent, hardworking, loyal, and a discerning chief counsel. And of course, those people she has negotiated with have found her to be a skillful and formidable but fair advocate. Her team at the subcommittee know her to be a determined leader and a steadfast friend. I've appreciated Caroline's deep knowledge of criminal laws, the strength of her convictions, and her courage to speak the truth in a place where it is rarely convenient to do so. We wish Caroline well in her new endeavors, and I thank her for her years of dedicated service to this committee, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the American people. And I know the ranking member, Mr. Conyers, would like to say a few words as well.
Thank you very much, Chairman Goodlatte. This is indeed a unique moment in our history. And on behalf of the Democratic staff and Democratic members of the committee, I want to recognize Caroline Lynch for her hard work and her dedication for the past 10 years. As chief crime counsel for the Republicans during this time, she worked collegially with her Democratic colleagues on a broad range of criminal justice issues. The Crime Subcommittee is legislatively the busiest subcommittee to me in all of Congress, and every crime-related bill that has been enacted during her time here has had the benefit of her expertise. There are many examples of this, but I will cite her role in helping members find common ground on Section 215 of the Patriot Act so that we could enact important reforms in the USA Freedom Act. This important law will both safeguard our national security and our civil liberties, and it set a precedent for how we can proceed on such issues in the future. Her work on this legislation was essential to its ultimate success. We'll miss her insight on these issues, as well as her friendship and her friendliness, as she leaves the committee for other endeavors in her home state of Arizona. We wish you all the best.
I think you would agree with me in saying that while her work is not quite done today and the rest of the week, she has also been very critical to the bipartisan work that we have been doing here the past few years, culminating in 11 bills so far passing out of this committee dealing with criminal justice reform, and we thank you for the contribution you made for that, and that work has been indeed very bipartisan. So we thank you all. We now welcome Director Comey to your fourth appearance before the House Judiciary Committee since your confirmation as the 7th Director of the FBI. Needless to say, the past year since our last oversight hearing has been challenging for the FBI on a number of fronts that we hope to review with you today. I want to begin by commending the men and women of the FBI and the NYPD and the New Jersey Police Departments for their swift action in identifying and apprehending Ahmad Khan Rahami, whose cold and cowardly acts of terrorism last week injured 29 American citizens. This was the latest in a string of attacks stretching back to the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing and continuing through the terror attacks in San Bernardino, Orlando, and Minneapolis. They all share one common thread, namely radical Islam. This administration, however, including the FBI, has coined this cancer with the euphemism of countering violent extremism. If the FBI and the rest of our national security apparatus continues its myopia about focusing on ethereal issues of extremism, their mission to protect the American people will always be one of following up on terrorism's aftermath. I look forward to hearing from you about how the FBI is working to proactively combat radical Islamic terrorism and put an end to this string of violence. While terrorism is a malignancy which must be purged, other events at home have called into question the confidence that Americans have historically held in a blind and impartial justice system. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the FBI's investigation into her seemingly criminal conduct is a case in point. It seems clear that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton committed multiple felonies involving the passing of classified information through her private email server. The FBI, however, declined to refer the case for prosecution on some very questionable bases. This past Friday afternoon, the FBI released additional investigative documents from the Clinton investigation, which demonstrate, among other things, that more than 100 of the emails on Secretary Clinton's private server contained classified information, and that emails required to be preserved under federal law were in fact destroyed. Even more alarming, we have recently learned that President Obama used a pseudonym to communicate with Secretary Clinton on her email server. Why is this relevant? As Secretary Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, claimed, when informed by the FBI of the existence of an email between her boss and the President, how is that not classified? Armed with knowledge of the President's now known to be false claim that he only learned of Clinton's private email account, quote, the same time everybody else learned it through news reports, end quote, did the FBI review why the President was also sending classified information over unsecure means. In effect, this President and the former Secretary of State improperly transmitted communications through non-secure channels, placing our nation's secrets in harm's way. Secretary Clinton's decision to play fast and loose with our national security concerned not simply her daughter's wedding planning or yoga routines, but instead, quoting you, Director Comey, quote, 7 email chains concerned matters that were classified at the top secret special access program level when they were sent and received. Top secret special access programs contain some of the most sensitive, secret information maintained by our government. This is a truly remarkable fact. Were anyone of lesser notoriety than Hillary Clinton guilty of doing this, that person would already be in jail. For Americans unsure what a Special Access Program, or SAP, is, it is the kind of information that a war planner would use to defeat an enemy, or even clandestine intelligence operations. The Wall Street Journal explained that a SAP usually refers to highly covert technology programs, often involving weaponry. Knowledge of these programs is usually restricted to small groups of people on a need-to-know basis. For those wondering whether this kind of information on an unsecure server is a problem, you need read no further than the Huffington Post, which reported Hillary Clinton's private email server containing tens of thousands of messages from her tenure as Secretary of State was the subject of hacking attempts from China, South Korea, and Germany after she stepped down in 2013. To conclude, let me ask everyone to engage in a thought experiment. One of this nation's signature accomplishments in the war on terror was the raid on Abbottabad, Pakistan on May 2, 2011, that resulted in the killing of Osama bin Laden. That operation, which was conducted by an elite team of U.S. Navy special operators, was, of course, highly classified. Now imagine, if you will, that classified information relating to the raid was passed through a non-secure email server and was accessed by nations or individuals hostile to the United States. Rather than a highly successful covert operation, we might have had a team of dead U.S. servicemen. Hillary Clinton chose to send and receive top-secret information over a personal, unsecure computer server housed in her various homes and once reportedly placed in a bathroom closet. These actions, without a doubt, opened these communications to hostile interception by our enemies and those who wish America harm. These facts, and not the imagined history I have asked you to contemplate, were the basis of the investigation by the FBI, and these are the facts that you, Director Comey, chose to hold unworthy of a recommendation to prosecute, saying that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. We, as Congress and the American people, are troubled how such gross negligence is not punished, and why there seems to be a different standard for the politically well-connected, particularly if your name is Clinton. Mr. Director, I look forward to your testimony today. And this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. Welcome again, Director Comey, for your appearance here today. The FBI's mission is a complex undertaking to protect the United States from terrorism, to enforce our criminal laws, and to lead the nation's law enforcement community. That mission ought to mirror our own priorities in this committee. In the past few days, for example, we have witnessed near-fatal terrorist attacks in Minnesota, New York, and New Jersey. These attacks underscore the growing fear that individuals can be moved to violence at home by the propaganda of ISIS and other terrorist groups abroad, even though they have no direct connection to those organizations. To me, this threat is dire. We should be doing all we can within our communities and within our constitutional framework to mitigate the danger. But will our majority here in the House use their time today to discuss these attacks? I suspect that they will not be in their focus in this campaign season. In Charlotte, in Tulsa, in Dallas, right here in Washington, and in other cities across this country, our citizens demand answers to questions about race and policing, and the use of lethal force by law enforcement. Our police are under siege, often under-resourced, and in some cases, hard-pressed to build trust with the communities they serve. Director Comey, your continued work to foster lines of communication between police officers and the general public is commendable and necessary if we are to keep our citizens safe from harm. But will my colleagues discuss this pressing issue with the director of the FBI, whose leadership in the law enforcement community is paramount? I hope so. I'm also afraid their focus may be elsewhere. The FBI is the lead agency in the investigation of cyber-based terrorism, computer intrusions, online sexual exploitation, and major cyber fraud. We've known for some years about the persistent cyber threat to our critical infrastructure. Now we hear reports of a new cyber threat to the very basis of our democratic process. Twice this summer, Director Comey, I wrote to you with my fellow ranking members to ask you to look into reports that Russian state actors are working to undermine our election process. Without objection, Mr. Chairman, I ask that both these letters be placed in the record.
Without objection, they will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. It is now the clear consensus of the intelligence community that the Russian government was behind the hack of the Democratic National Committee, and not, as some suggested, somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds. On Friday, we learned that from one report that the United States intelligence officials are seeking to determine whether an American businessman identified by Donald Trump as one of his foreign policy advisors has opened up private communications with senior Russian officials, including talks about the possible lifting of economic sanctions if the Republican nominee becomes president. The report cites to an unnamed, quote, senior U.S. law enforcement official, end quote, which I presume means someone in your orbit, Mr. Director. Without objection, I ask that this article, Mr. Chairman, be placed into the record as well.
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. Let me be clear. If true, this allegation represents a danger to our national security and a clear violation of federal law, which expressly prohibits this type of back-channel negotiation. And I'm not alone in describing the nature of this threat. Speaker Ryan himself has said that Russia is a global menace led by a devious thug. Putin should stay out of this election, end quotation. But will our majority join us and press you on this problem today, Director Comey? Instead, I believe that the focus of this hearing will be more of the same, an attack on you and your team at the Department of Justice for declining to recommend criminal charges against Secretary Hillary Clinton. In recent weeks, this line of attack has been remarkable only for its lack of substance. Your critics dwell in character assassination and procedural minutiae, like the proper scope of immunity agreements, and your decision to protect the identities of individuals wholly unrelated to the investigation. They want to investigate the investigation, Director Comey, and I consider that an unfortunate waste of this committee's time. With so many actual problems confronting this nation, and so many of those challenges within your jurisdiction and ours, you would think my colleagues would set their priorities differently. I hope that they do, and they listen to our conversation today. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers, and without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. We welcome our distinguished witness, and if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. FBI Director James Comey is a graduate of the College of William and Mary and the University of Chicago Law School. Following law school, Director Comey served as an assistant United States attorney for both the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. He returned to New York to become the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and in 2003, he served as the Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice. Director Comey, we look forward to your testimony. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. You may begin. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Conyers, members of the Judiciary Committee. It's good to be back before you. As the chairman said, for the 4th time. I have 6 more to go, and I look forward to our conversations each time. I know that this morning there will be questions about the email investigation, and I'm happy to answer those to the absolute best of my ability. In July, when we closed this case, I promised unusual transparency, and I think we've delivered on that promise in, frankly, an unprecedented way, and I will do my absolute best to continue to be transparent in every way possible. But what I thought I would do, because I know we'll talk about that quite a bit, I want to just focus on some of the other things the FBI has been doing just in the last couple of weeks. And my objective is to make clear to you and to the American people the quality of the people who have chosen to do this with their lives, to do something that's not about money, it's not about the living, it's about the life that they make. And I just picked 4 different examples of things we've been working on that illustrate the quality of the folks, the scope of the work, which is extraordinary, and the importance of partnerships, because it is true that the FBI does nothing alone. So just to tick off 4 from 4 different parts of our organization, obviously, as the chair and Mr. Conyers both mentioned, in the last couple of weeks, our folks in the New York area have been working in an extraordinary way with their partners at federal, state, and local organizations of all kinds to bring to justice very quickly the bomber in the New Jersey and New York attacks. That work was done in a way, frankly, that would have been hard to imagine 15 years ago in a time of turf battles and worries about my jurisdiction, your jurisdiction. They showed you how it should be done, how it must be done, and I think we should all be very proud of them. Second, within the last week, a hacker from Kosovo who worked for the so-called Islamic State in hacking in and taking the identities and personal information of American military employees and then giving it to the Islamic State so they could target these people, was sentenced to 20 years in jail for that hacking. His name is Ardit Farizi. Our great folks, together with lots of partners around the world, found this Kosovar in Malaysia, and our Malaysian partners arrested him, brought him back to Virginia, where he was just sentenced to 20 years for his hacking on behalf of the Islamic State. Terrific work by our cyber investigators. And obviously, as you know, we are doing an awful lot of work through our counterintelligence investigators to understand just what mischief is Russia up to in connection with our election. That is work that goes on all day, every day, about which I'm limited in terms of answering questions. But I wanted you to know that's a part of our work we don't talk about an awful lot, but it's at the core of the FBI. And the last one I want to mention is 2 weeks ago, a 6-year-old girl was kidnapped off her front lawn in eastern North Carolina in a stranger kidnapping. And all of law enforcement in North Carolina surged on that case. We rolled our child abduction rapid deployment team, which is a capability we've built around the country to help in just these kinds of situations. These are agents and analysts who are expert at doing what has to be done in that golden 24 hours you have to try and save a child. And so we rolled those resources. We work with our partners at state and local levels in North Carolina. And overnight, we found that little girl. We found that little girl chained by her neck to a tree in the woods, alive, thank God, and she was rescued. The picture that they showed me that morning of that little girl with wide eyes and her long hair around her shoulders, but still a thick chain around her neck connecting her to that tree, is one I will never be able to get out of my own head, because it's both terrible and wonderful. It's terrible because of what happened to this little girl. It's wonderful because together we found her and saved her. So I called the sheriff in North Carolina. I called our key team members who had worked on that to thank them. And they told me that they were relieved and exhausted, and that they are all hardened investigators, but they stood that early morning in the command center and cried together, because it almost never ends this way. So I said to the sheriff and to our people, I wish we didn't live in a world where little girls were kidnapped off of their front lawns, where we had to do this kind of work. But unfortunately, we live in that world. And because we do, I am so glad that those people and the rest of the people that work for the FBI are in that world, because we are safer, we're better, because they've chosen to do this with their lives. The best part of my job is the people I get to watch, to see their work, to admire their work, to support their work in any way that I can. They are doing extraordinary work for the American people across an incredible array of responsibilities. I know you know that, and we're very grateful for the support you give to the men and women of the FBI. And I look forward to our conversation about their work, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Comey. We'll now begin questioning under the 5-minute rule, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. You testified that the FBI did not investigate the veracity of Secretary Clinton's testimony to the Select Benghazi Committee under oath. We referred the matter to the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. Is the FBI now investigating the veracity of Secretary Clinton's testimony to the Select Benghazi Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department has the referral. I think there were 2 separate referrals. Has the referrals. Now it's pending. And so I'm not going to comment on a pending matter at this point. But the matter has been received by the Department of Justice. They have the letters from the committee.
And you cannot tell us whether or not you are indeed investigating?
I can't.
When do you expect that you'll be able to tell us more about this pending matter before the FBI?
I don't know, sir.
Paul Combetta with Platte River Networks posted to Reddit asking how to strip out a VIP's, very VIP email address from a bunch of archived email, end quote. He went on, quote, the issue is that these emails involve the private email address of someone you'd recognize, and we're trying to replace it with a placeholder address as to not expose it, end quote. This clearly demonstrates actions taken to destroy evidence by those operating Secretary Clinton's private server and by her staff. Certainly, Combetta did not take it upon himself to destroy evidence, but had been instructed to do so by Secretary Clinton or her staff. My first question to you is, was the FBI aware of this Reddit post prior to offering Mr. Combetta immunity on May 3, 2016?
I'm not sure. I know that our team looked at it. I don't know whether they knew about it before then or not.
Isn't this information evidence of obstruction of justice and a violation of Mr. Combetta's immunity deal?
Not necessarily, no.
Why not?
It depends on what his intention was, why he wanted to do it. And I think our team concluded that what he was trying to do was, when they produced emails, not have the actual address, but have some name or placeholder instead of the actual .com address in the from line.
Last week, the American people learned that Cheryl Mills, Secretary Clinton's longtime confidant and former State Department Chief of Staff, and Heather Samuelson, counsel to Secretary Clinton in the State Department, were granted immunity for production of their laptops. Why were they not targets of the FBI's criminal investigation?
Well, a target is someone on whom you have sufficient evidence to indict. A subject is someone whose conduct at some point during the investigation falls within the scope of the investigation. So certainly with respect to Ms. Mills, at least initially, because she was an email correspondent, she was a subject of the investigation.
Did the FBI find classified information on either of their computers?
I think there were some emails still on the computer that were recovered that were classified, is my recollection.
Isn't that a crime?
Is what a crime, sir?
Having classified information on computers that are outside of the server system of the Department of State, unsecured.
No, it's certainly something, without knowing more, you couldn't conclude whether it was a crime. You'd have to know what were the circumstances, what was the intention around that, but it's certainly something, it's the reason we conducted a year-long investigation to understand where emails had gone on an unclassified system that contained classified information.
And what did you determine with regard to the emails found on her computer?
I hope I'm getting this right, and my troops will correct me if I'm wrong, but they were duplicates of emails that had been produced because the emails had been used to sort before a production.
Now, both Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson were granted immunity for production of these computers, these laptops. Why were they then allowed to sit in on the interview with Secretary Clinton?
Right. The Department of Justice reached a letter agreement with the two lawyers to give them what's called act of production immunity, meaning nothing that's found on the laptop they turn over will be used against them directly, and which is a fairly normal tool in investigations. They were, Ms. Mills in particular was a member of the Secretary Clinton's legal team, and so Secretary Clinton decides which of her lawyers come to voluntary interviews with the FBI.
Is it usual to allow a witness or potential witness in a subsequent prosecution, had one been undertaken, to be present in the room when the FBI interviews another witness and potential target of an investigation?
The FBI has no ability to exclude or include any lawyer that a subject being interviewed chooses to have there.
Even if the lawyer is a witness in the case, can you cite any other instance in which a witness to a criminal investigation who has already been interviewed by the FBI has been allowed to accompany and serve as legal counsel to the target of that investigation?
I can't from personal experience. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened. The Department of Justice, the FBI has no ability to decide who comes to an interview in a voluntary interview context. If it was a judicial proceeding, a judge could police who could be there, and obviously lawyers are governed by canons of ethics to decide what matters they can be involved in, but it doesn't fall to us to say you can be in, you can't be in.
But wouldn't you agree that it is a conflict of interest for them to serve as attorneys for Secretary Clinton in this matter, having been interviewed by the FBI as witnesses?
That's a question a lawyer has to answer for him or herself.
You're a lawyer, Director Comey. What's your opinion of that?
Oh, I don't want to offer an opinion on that, but that's something a lawyer has to decide for themselves. I assume with counsel and consulting our canons of ethics, what matters you can be involved in and what you can't. But again, the Bureau's role in conducting a voluntary interview is to interview the subject. Who they bring is up to them.
How can you trust the veracity of Secretary Clinton's answers, knowing that witnesses previously interviewed by the FBI were allowed to participate in the interview?
We assess the answers based on what's said and all the other evidence we've gathered.
In consultation with her, quote, attorneys who are also witnesses to what was previously done earlier and may, in fact, have themselves violated the law for which they requested and were granted immunity.
Again, the answer is the same. We make the assessment based on what the witness says and the other evidence we've gathered in the case. Who's sitting there, to me, is not particularly germane.
Thank you. My time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Director James Comey, twice this past week, the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, has been shaken by the shooting deaths of black men. It's only one city out of many in this country looking for answers about the use of force by police. We on this committee are looking for answers too. You are a vocal advocate for better collection of information about violent encounters between police and civilians. Has the FBI's ability to collect this information improved in the years since we have last discussed it? And why are these statistics so important to our current discussion on the use of force by police?
Thank you, Mr. Conyers. We're having passionate, important conversations in this country about police use of force in connection with encounters with civilians, especially with African Americans.
Yes.
All of those conversations are uninformed today. They're all driven by anecdote because as a country we simply don't have the information to know, do we have an epidemic of violence directed by law enforcement against black folks? Do we have an epidemic involving brown folks, white folks? We just don't know. And in the absence of that data, we're driven entirely by anecdote, and that's a very bad place to be. I don't know whether there's an epidemic of violence. My instincts tell me there isn't, but I don't know. I can't tell you whether shootings involving people of any different color are up or down or sideways, and nor can anybody else in this country. And so to discuss the most important things that are going on in this country, we need information, and the government should collect it. I can't think of something that's more inherently governmental than the need to use deadly force in an encounter during law enforcement work. And so what's changed in the last year, which is really good news, is that everybody in leadership in law enforcement in the United States has agreed with this, and they've agreed the FBI will build and maintain a database where we collect important information about all such encounters involving the use of deadly force. That will allow us to know what's going on in this country so we can have a thoughtful conversation and resist being ruled by individual anecdotes. That's why it matters so much. We're making progress. We will have this done. I'd like to have it done in the next year. Certainly in the next 2 years, this database will be up and running because everybody gets why it matters so much.
Thank you. On August 30th, I wrote to you regarding Donald Trump's extensive connections to the Russian government. The letter cites to a number of troubling reports, some that suggest mere conflicts of interest, others that might suggest evidence of a crime. Last Friday, we read a new report suggesting that Mr. Trump's foreign policy advisor has been meeting with high-ranking sanctioned officials in Moscow to discuss lifting economic sanctions if Mr. Donald Trump becomes president. The same report quotes, quote, a senior United States law enforcement official who says that this relationship is being, quote, actively monitored and investigated, end quotation. Is the FBI investigating the activities of Mr. Trump or any advisor to the Trump campaign with respect to any line of communication between the campaign and the Russian government?
I can't say, sir. As I said in response to a different question from the chairman, we don't confirm or deny investigations.
Well, more generally then, is it lawful for a private citizen to enter into official government negotiations with a foreign nation?
I don't think it's appropriate for me to answer that hypothetical.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my view, our research shows that it is not. The Logan Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 953, prohibits this conduct, in my view. And finally, does Mr. Trump currently receive intelligence briefings from the FBI?
Both candidates and their running mates are offered on a regular basis briefings from the entire intelligence community. Mm-hmm. Some portion of the first briefing included an FBI segment. So yes.
Does his staff attend those meetings as well?
No, just the candidate and the vice presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm. And finally, if a member of either
you know, I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I got to correct what I said. Each was allowed to bring 2 people. And as I recall, Mr. Trump did bring two individuals with clearances to the briefing. Secretary Clinton did not. I'm sorry, I misstated that.
All right. Finally, if a member of either campaign were engaged in secret back-channel communications with a foreign adversary, could that line of communication pose a threat to national security?
Mr. Conyers, I don't think it's appropriate, given that I'm not commenting on whether we have an investigation, to answer hypotheticals that might make it look like I'm commenting on whether we have an investigation. So I'd prefer not to answer that, sir.
Well, thank you for being here today, and I thank the chairman and yield back.
Sure, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, welcome. Who authorized granting Cheryl Mills immunity?
I'm sorry?
Who authorized granting Cheryl Mills immunity?
It's a decision made by the Department of Justice. I don't know at what level inside. In our investigations, if any kind of immunity comes from the prosecutors, not the investigators.
Okay. Did she request immunity?
I don't know for sure what the negotiations involved. I believe her lawyer asked for act of production immunity with respect to the production of her laptop. That's my understanding. But again, the FBI wasn't part of those conversations.
Now, it's been a matter of public record that Secretary Clinton brought 9 people into the room where 2 FBI agents were questioning her. Is that normal practice?
No, there is a normal practice. I've done interviews with a big crowd and some with just the subject. It's unusual to have that large a number, but it's not unprecedented in my experience.
Now, Cheryl Mills, also stated that she was an attorney. I'm very concerned that when a fact witness represents a client who might be the target of an investigation, there's a conflict of interest, and rather than letting Ms. Mills make a determination, would the FBI be willing to refer the matter of a fact witness, Ms. Mills in this case, representing a target, Secretary Clinton in this case, to the appropriate bar association for investigation?
That's not a role for the FBI. We're investigating. Even though I happen to be a lawyer, we're not lawyers, we're investigators. Okay. So that's a question for the legal part of the Department of Justice.
Okay. Why did Ms. Mills request immunity? Was she hiding something, or was she afraid that something would incriminate her that was on her laptop?
I don't know. I'm sure that's a conversation she and her lawyer had, and then her lawyer had with lawyers at the department. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was an op-ed by Professor Jonathan Turley that appeared in the media that said that there are a lot of good cases scuttled by granting immunity, and there was lots of immunity that was granted here. Doesn't it concern you as an investigator that your chiefs in the Justice Department decided to become an immunity-producing machine for many people who would have been very key witnesses should there have been a prosecution?
I don't think of it that way. It doesn't strike me there was a lot of immunity issued in this case. I know it's a complicated subject, but there's all different kinds of immunity. There's probably 3 different kinds that featured in this case. Fairly typical in a complex white-collar case, especially as you try and work your way up towards your subject. So my overall reaction is this looks like ordinary investigative process to me.
Well, the target was not an ordinary target. I think we all know that. And since you announced that there would be no prosecution of Secretary Clinton in July, there have been several very material issues that are troubling. And would thus not require a reopening of the investigation to solve those issues?
I haven't seen anything that would come near to that kind of situation.
Oh.
I know there's lots of questions, lots of controversy. I'm very proud of the way this was done.
Well, come on now, with all, due respect, since you made this announcement, there have issues that came out that were not on the table prior to your announcement that the investigation against Secretary Clinton had been dropped. And I think the American public is entitled to answers on this, particularly since we have to know, the extent of the classified information which ended up being in the private email server. All of us on this committee have got security clearances of some kind or another. And I'm kind of worried that, if I got some classified information and went back to my office and used an unsecured server to send it to somebody who may also have had a classified information, I would be in big trouble, and I should be in big trouble if I did something like that. There seems to be different strokes for different folks on this, and that's what Americans are concerned about, particularly when we're looking to elect someone to the highest office of the land and the leader of the free world. I don't think your answers are satisfactory at all, Mr. Comey. I do have a great deal of respect for you, but I think that there's a heavy hand coming from someplace else, and with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me express my admiration and thanks to the FBI for the professional manner and excellent work they did in the bombings that occurred in New York about a block out of my district to apprehend the suspect within, 48 hours and do everything was a very good indication of teamwork and of professionalism, and I congratulate you on that. Secondly, let me say that I think that the mud that is being thrown from the other side of this table here continually only because of the ongoing presidential election, in the case in which the FBI decided there was nothing to prosecute, it's over, and we all know nobody would be even talking about it if if Hillary Clinton weren't a presidential candidate. This is pure political maneuvering. But let me talk about a case that may pose a current national security threat to the United States, and ask you a few questions about that. In his earlier remarks, Mr. Conyers referenced an August 30th letter from the ranking members of a number of House committees. That letter asked whether the FBI was investigating troubling connections between Trump campaign officials and Russian interests, and whether they contributed to the illegal hacking of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic National Campaign Committee. You're familiar with that letter, I take it?
Yes, I'm familiar with the letter.
I'd like to ask you a few questions. The letter said this, and I quote, on August 8th, 2016, Roger Stone, a Donald Trump confidant, revealed that he has communicated with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange about the upcoming release of additional illegally hacked Democratic documents. Mr. Stone made these statements during a Republican campaign event while answering a question about a potential October surprise. Obviously, if someone is stating publicly that he is in direct communication with the organization that obtained these illegally hacked documents, I assume the FBI would want to talk to that person. Has the FBI interviewed Roger Stone about his communications with Julian Assange or his knowledge of how WikiLeaks got these illegally obtained documents?
I can't comment on that.
Mr. Stone stated that he has knowledge about upcoming leaks of additional illegally hacked documents. Has the FBI asked him about those communications?
I also can't comment on that.
Because it's an ongoing investigation?
I don't want to confirm whether there is or is not an investigation. That's the way I answered Mr. Conyers' questions as well.
Director Comey, the FBI acknowledged in public statements and testimony that it was investigating Secretary Clinton's use of a private email server, and that was while the investigation was still ongoing. Now you can't comment on whether there's an investigation. Is there a different standard for Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump? If not, what is the consistent standard?
No, our standard is we do not confirm or deny the existence of investigations. There's an exception for that when there is a need for the public to be reassured, when it's obvious, it's apparent given our activities, public activities, that the investigation is ongoing. But our overwhelming rule is we do not comment except in certain exceptional circumstances.
Aren't there exceptional circumstances when close officials to a candidate of a major political party for the United States says publicly that he's in communication with foreign officials and anticipates further illegal activity?
I don't think so.
Mr. Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, resigned after failing to disclose his role in assisting a pro-Russian party in Ukraine. The Associated Press reported, and I quote, Donald Trump's campaign chairman helped the pro-Russian party in Ukraine secretly route $2.2 million in payments to two prominent Washington lobbying firms in 2012, and did so in a way that effectively obscured the foreign political party's efforts to influence U.S. policy. Has the FBI interviewed Mr. Manafort about his failure to disclose his work for this foreign government as federal law requires?
I have to give you the same answer, Mr. Nadler.
Has the FBI interviewed Rick Gates, who reportedly still works for the Trump campaign, about his involvement in this scheme?
Same answer, sir.
Director Comey, after you investigated Secretary Clinton, you made a decision to explain publicly who you interviewed and why. You also disclosed documents, including notes from those interviews. Why shouldn't the American people have the same level of information about your investigation of those associated with Mr. Trump?
I'm not confirming that we're investigating people associated with Mr. Trump. In the matter of the email investigation, it was our judgment, my judgment, and the rest of the FBI's judgment that those were exceptional circumstances where the public needed transparency.
Okay, my final question is the following. You investigated Secretary Clinton's emails and so forth, everything we've been talking about. You concluded, I believe quite properly, that there was nothing to prosecute. And you announced, in my opinion, quite properly, that you had investigated it and that there was nothing there, or there was nothing to prosecute. That was proper. But having announced, when a prosecutorial agency announces that we've investigated so-and-so and we've decided to prosecute because, or we've investigated so-and-so and we've decided not to prosecute because, why is it appropriate for that prosecutorial agency to go further and say, even though we've decided not to prosecute, we still think this person did this, that, or the other thing, and it was proper or improper? Why is it proper for a prosecutorial agency to characterize your opinion of the propriety of the actions of someone whom you have announced that you have decided there's nothing criminal and shouldn't be prosecuted?
It's a very hard decision. That's why it's the exception to the rule. You do risk damaging someone who isn't convicted. The judgment I made in this case is, given the unusual, in fact, I hope unprecedented nature of this investigation, that it was appropriate to offer that transparency. Not an easy call. I really wrestled with it, but I think on balance it was.
Let me just say, before my time expires, that I think, and I'm just talking for myself, that that was highly inappropriate, that having determined that there was nothing to prosecute and having announced that quite properly, for a prosecuting agency, for the Department of Justice to comment with comments that will be looked upon as authoritative, that what she did was right or wrong or good or bad, is not the appropriate role of a prosecuting agency, and risks, not in this case perhaps, but risk, and I talk really now because of the future. I don't want to see that happen again with regard to anybody, because it puts anybody who did not commit a crime, who you have determined, you or the Justice Department, whoever is determined, did not commit a crime where there's no evidence sufficient to prosecute, puts them at the mercy of the opinion of an individual or individuals within the prosecuting agency, and that's just not right under our system. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, thank you for those examples of the FBI's good work in your opening statement. I think we all appreciated what the FBI has done. My first question is this. Would you reopen the Clinton investigation if you discovered new information that was both relevant and substantial?
It's hard for me to answer in the abstract. We would certainly look at any new and substantial information.
Yeah. In general, and let's impersonalize it, in general, if you discovered new information that was substantial and relevant, you would reopen an investigation, would you not?
Again, even in general, I don't think we can answer that in the abstract. What we can say is if any investigation, if people have new and substantial information, we'd like to see it so we can make an evaluation.
Okay. Let me give you some examples and mention several new developments that I think have occurred and ask you if you have become aware of them. The first example is what the chairman mentioned a while ago. An employee at a company that managed former Secretary Clinton's private email server said, quote, "I need to strip out a VIP's, very VIP, email address from a bunch of archived emails. Basically, they don't want the VIP's email address exposed to anyone." I assume you're aware of that.
I'm aware of that.
Okay. The same employee called a new retention policy designed to delete emails after 60 days a, quote, Hillary cover-up operation. And you saw that, did you not?
Say the last, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, I couldn't hear the last.
Same employee called a new retention policy designed to delete emails after 60 days a Hillary cover-up operation. You saw that?
I don't know that particular language.
Okay. We'll get you the source, but you can take my word for it that that's what he said.
I will.
Another example, a former Clinton Foundation employee who also managed the Clinton server destroyed devices used by former Secretary Clinton by smashing them with a hammer. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Two employees of the company that managed former Secretary Clinton's server recently pled the Fifth Amendment to Congress to avoid self-incrimination. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. And then lastly, 15,000 more work-related emails were discovered, though there had been an attempt to wrongly delete them. And you're aware of that?
I think we discovered them.
Right. To me, Director Comey, what I've cited are not the actions of innocent people. There is a distinct possibility that Mrs. Clinton or her staff directed others to destroy evidence in a government investigation, which of course is against the law. So I would urge you to reopen your investigation. Do you want to comment on that?
I don't.
Okay. I know you can't tell us whether you have or have not, but I believe I've given evidence of new information that is relevant and substantial that would justify reopening the investigation. My next question is this. I know you've granted immunity to a number of individuals, but if you had new information that is relevant and substantial, you would be able to investigate them further, wouldn't you?
Not to quibble, the FBI doesn't grant immunity to anybody. The Department of Justice is able to grant very different kinds of immunity. Yeah, and immunity, if new and substantial evidence develops, either that a witness lied under a grant of use immunity or under any kind of immunity, of course the Department of Justice can pursue it.
Okay.
Nobody gets lifetime immunity.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Director Comey. Last question is this. As chairman of the Science Committee, I issued the FBI a subpoena on September 19, 2016. The due date for a response was 2 days ago, September 26. Bureau staff has still not provided the requested information and documents. Yesterday, we pointed out to them that the Science Committee has jurisdiction over the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which sets standards for the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014. I trust you intend to comply with the subpoena.
I intend to continue the conversations we've been having about the subpoena.
Yeah.
As you know, we've made a lot of documents available to at least 6 committees. And the question of whether we should make them available to another committee is something that we're struggling with, but talking to your folks about.
To me, there's no struggle. If we have clear jurisdiction, which we can demonstrate, it, I think, obligates you to comply with the subpoena.
Yes, sir. We're not trying to be disrespectful. We're just not sure we see the jurisdictional issue the way that your folks do, but we're continuing to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you, Director Comey.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll yield to the gentleman from California.
Thank you. The chairman of the full committee had asked something earlier, and I just want to point out and ask it to be placed in the record. According to the Maryland Code of Ethics, 19301.11, it specifically prohibits a former or current government officer or employee from acting as a counsel to someone that they represented in government. I'd like that to be placed in the record. In light of the fact that the Maryland Bar
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record.
In light of the fact the Maryland Bar has this prohibition, would that have changed your view of allowing her in and saying you had no authority?
I'm not qualified, nor am I going to answer questions about legal ethics in this forum. The FBI has no basis to exclude somebody from an interview who the subject of the interview says is on their legal team.
Okay. Thank you, Director Comey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Chair, thanks. Gentleman recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Comey, for once again appearing before this committee as you appear before so many committees here on the House. Sometimes I wonder how you get any work done at all that you are called up here so frequently. You know, there's been a lot of focus on the private email that Secretary Clinton used, just as her predecessor, Colin Powell, used. So far as I'm aware from the public comments, there's no forensic evidence that there was a breach of that service, although theoretically you could intrude and not leave evidence. But there's been very little focus on the breach at the State Department email system. Now, it's been reported in the press that this breach of the State Department email system was one of the largest ever of a federal system and was accomplished by, according to the press, either China or Russia. I'm wondering if you are able to give us any insight into whether it was in fact the Russians who hacked into the State Department email system or whether that's still under investigation.
Not in this open forum, I can't.
All right. I'm hoping that we can get some insight in an appropriate classified setting on that. Now, we have watched with some concern, and I know you are also concerned, about the Russian intrusion into our election system. It's been reported to us that the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee database. They also hacked into the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and it seems that they are making an effort to influence the outcome of this election. We've been warned that the information stolen might not just be released, but also be altered and forged and then released in an effort to impact the election here in the United States. Yesterday, there were press reports, and I don't know if they're accurate, and I'm interested if you're able to tell us, that the Russians have also hacked the telephones of Democratic staffers, and that there was a request for Democratic staffers to bring their cell phones into the FBI to have them mirrored. Can you tell us anything about that?
I can't at this point. What I can say in response to the first part of your question, any hacking is something we take very seriously. Any hacking in connection with this nation's election system is something we take extraordinarily seriously, the whole of government. And so it is something the FBI is spending a lot of time on right now to try and understand, so what are they up to and what does it involve and what's the scope of it, to equip the President to decide upon the appropriate response. And so that's one of the reasons I have to be very careful about what I say about it. That work is ongoing. I should make clear to folks, when we talk about our election system, there's been a lot of press reporting about attempts to intrude into voter registration databases. Those are connected to the Internet. That's very different than the electoral mechanism in this country.
No, we had actually a hearing, and I had the chance to talk to Alex Padilla, who's the Secretary of State in California. Number one, they encrypt their database. Number two, even if you were to steal it, there's backups that you couldn't steal. So you can't really manipulate that, but you could cause a lot of damage. I mean, you could create chaos on Election Day that would, and you could target that chaos to areas of where voters had a tendency to vote for one candidate over another in an attempt to influence the outcome. So it's not a benign situation, certainly, and one that we want to worry about. I want to just quickly touch on a concern I have also on cyber, on Rule 41 and how the FBI is interpreting that. I'm concerned that the change, as understood by the FBI, would allow for one warrant for multiple computers, but would include allowing the FBI to access victims' computers in order to clean them up. The cybersecurity experts that I've been in touch with have raised very strong concerns about that provision, especially using malware's own signaling system to disable the malware. The cyber experts who have talked to me and expressed concern believe that that ultimately could actually trigger attacks. And so I'm wondering if you have any comments on how the FBI intends to use Rule 41 vis-a-vis malware on victims' computers.
Thank you.
The time of the gentlewoman has expired. The witness will be permitted to answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not an expert, but one of the challenges we face, especially in dealing with these huge criminal botnets, which have harvested and connected lots of innocent people's computers, is how do we execute a search warrant to try and figure out where the bad guys are and get them away from those innocent people? And what the challenge we've been facing is to go to every single jurisdiction and get a warrant would take literally years. And so we're trying to figure out, can we use Rule 41 to have one judge issue that order and give us that authority.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired. I'd just like to close by expressing the hope that the FBI might seek the guidance of some of the computer experts at our national labs on this very question of triggering malware attacks, and I yield back.
Point is well taken. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, Chairman Goodlatte, in his introduction of you, mentioned that you're a graduate of the College of William & Mary, and as you may well know, I'm a graduate of William & Mary as well. Anyway, you may remember that our alma mater is very proud of something called the Honor Code. And I checked out the wording of the Honor Code to make sure that I was correct on it, and I'll tell you exactly what it says. It says, as a member of the William & Mary community, I pledge on my honor not to lie, cheat, or steal, either in my academic or in my personal life, unquote. Well, one of the people whose behavior you investigated, Hillary Clinton, didn't have the good fortune to attend the College of William & Mary, but she did attend Wellesley. And I wondered whether they had an honor code, and I found out, I looked it up, they do, and they did. And here's what it says. As a Wellesley College student, I will act with honesty, integrity, and respect. In making this commitment, I am accountable to the community and dedicate myself to a life of honor, unquote. Let me repeat part of that again. I will act with honesty. Now, I'm sure the young women attending Wellesley today and those that have attended it in the past are proud that one of their own could be the next president of the United States. But a majority of the American people have come to the conclusion that Hillary Clinton is not honest and cannot be trusted. It's about 2 to 1 who say that she's dishonest. In the latest Quinnipiac poll, for example, the question being, would you say that Hillary Clinton is honest or not? 65% said no, and only 32% said yes, she is honest. You know, Republicans and Democrats, not surprisingly, were overwhelmingly one way or the other, but independents, 80% of them said nope, she's not honest, and only 19% of them said she is. So, Director Comey, since you and your people were the ones who investigated Hillary Clinton's email scandal, I'd just like to ask a couple of questions. First, Hillary Clinton claimed over and over that none of the emails that she sent contained classified information. Was she truthful when she said that?
As I said when I testified in July, there were, I'm forgetting now after 2.5 months the exact number, but there were 80 or so emails that contained classified information.
Okay, so she said they didn't contain classified information, and they did, so that sounds like not being truthful. Not trying to put words into your mouth, but I think that's what that means. Hillary Clinton then came up with a fallback position saying, well, none of the emails I sent were marked classified, but that wasn't true either, was it?
There were 3, as I recall, 3 emails that bore within the body of the text a portion marking that indicated they were classified confidential.
And again, not putting words in your mouth, but I think that means that no, she didn't tell the truth in that particular instance. Hillary Clinton said she decided to use a personal email server system for convenience, and that she'd only have to carry around one BlackBerry. Was she being truthful when she said she just used one device?
She used, during her tenure as Secretary of State, multiple devices, not at the same time, but sequentially.
Okay, again, I'm going to take that as she said one and it was more, so therefore not honest. And in fact, some of the devices were destroyed with a hammer, as has already been mentioned. Is that the type of behavior that you would expect from someone who was being fully cooperative with an investigation, destroying devices containing potential evidence with a hammer?
Well, we uncovered no evidence that devices were destroyed during the pendency of our investigation. And so why people destroy devices when there's no investigation is a question I'm not able to answer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Director, a little less than 2 months ago, Hillary Clinton, in talking about her emails, claimed that you said, and I quote, that my answers were truthful. PolitiFact, by the way, gave this claim a pants-on-fire rating. Did you say that she was telling the truth with respect to her email claims?
I did not. I'd never say that about anybody. Our business is never to decide whether we believe someone. Our business is always to decide what evidence do we have that would convince us not to believe that person. It's an odd way to look at the world, but it's how investigators look at the world.
Thank you. Director Comey, it must have been, and I'm almost out of time, it must have been very awkward for you. You're tasked with investigating a person who could be the next President of the United States. And the current President of the United States has already prejudged the case and telegraphed to you and the entire Justice Department that he, your boss, has come to the conclusion that there's not even a smidgen of corruption, his own words, before you've even completed your investigation. You were aware that he'd said that, weren't you?
Yes, I saw those reported in the press.
Okay, and finally, it just seems to me here that there was clearly a double standard going on. Like, for example, if anybody else had done this, like a soldier or a serviceman who did virtually the same thing, they would have been prosecuted and were, but not Hillary Clinton. And that's a double standard, and that's not the way it's supposed to work in America. And I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I disagree with that characterization, but
The gentleman is permitted to respond.
I don't think so. I actually think if we were to recommend she be prosecuted, that would be a double standard, because Mary and Joe at the FBI or some other place, if they did this, would not be prosecuted. They'd be disciplined. They'd be in big trouble in the FBI. If you did this, you would not be prosecuted. That wouldn't be fair. Okay.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you so very much. Many Americans have come to trust Hillary Clinton as a dedicated, committed public servant. But I believe it's important as we address these questions. Let me make 1 or 2 points. My colleagues have already made it, and I look forward maybe to coming back to Washington to dealing with the potential Russian intrusion on the election system. I'm not asking you, Director, at this time. And also the issue of connecting the dots as we deal with terrorism across America. But I do want to acknowledge Eric Williams, an outstanding detailee to this Judiciary Committee. Thank him for his service. And I want to thank the SAC in Houston, Mr. Turner, for helping us in the shooting that occurred in Houston, as you well know, that gave us a great deal of fear and scare just a couple of days ago. But Director Comey, my Republican colleagues have questioned, second-guessed, and attacked you and your team of career FBI agents. They disagree with the results of your investigation. They want you to prosecute or to ask the DOJ to prosecute Secretary Clinton regardless of the facts. So they've engaged in an almost daily ritual of holding hearings, desperately trying to tear down your investigation and your recommendation. I believe you testified previously that your recommendation in that case was unanimous, and your investigation was carried out by what you called an all-star team of career agents and prosecutors. Is that right?
Yes, these are some of our very best. And sometimes because I'm lucky enough to be the person who represents the FBI, people think it's my conclusion. Sure, it's my conclusion, but I'm reporting what the team thought and their supervisors. As I said, this was, as painful as it is for people sometimes, this was not a close call.
Let me continue. You have written that the case itself was not a cliffhanger. Is that right?
Correct.
Recently, Republicans have attacked the decision to provide limited immunity to individuals during the investigation. For example, when Congressman Shavitz learned about this, he stated, and I quote, "No wonder they couldn't prosecute a case. They were handing out immunity deals like candy." I understand that the FBI does not make the final call on immunity agreements. That was the DOJ. You made that clear. So his statement was just wrong. But did you consult closely with DOJ before these immunity agreements were concluded by having facts?
Right. Our job is to tell them what facts we'd like to get access to. The prosecutor's job is to figure out how to do that. And so they negotiate. I think there were 5 limited immunity agreements of different kinds that they negotiated.
Did you or anyone at the FBI ever object to these decisions to grant immunity? Did you think they made sense?
No, it was fairly ordinary stuff.
Was the FBI or DOJ handing out immunity agreements like candy?
That's not how I saw it and see it.
Congressman Gowdy, a good friend, also objected to granting immunity to Brian Pagliano and Mr. Combetta at Platte River Networks. He quoted, "These are the 2 people that FBI decides to give immunity to, Brian and the guy at Platte River, if it happened. Those are the 2 that you would want to prosecute, so you're giving immunity to the trigger people, and everybody goes free." Do you agree with this assessment? Did the FBI screw up here and let everyone go free because of these limited immunity deals?
No, I don't think so. The goal in an investigation like this is to work up. And if people have information that their lawyers are telling you that you're not going to get without some limited form of immunity, and they're lower down, you try to get that information to see if you can make a case against your subjects.
Congressman Gowdy also said this about the FBI, and I quote, "I've been underwhelmed by an agency that I once had tremendous respect for." Let me just say, sitting on this Judiciary Committee for many, many years, going through a number of investigations, I've never been proud of an agency that has always been there when vulnerable people are hurting and when there is a need for great work. But my question to you is, what is your response to that, Director Comey? Do you believe these criticisms are fair?
I think questions are fair. I think criticism is healthy and fair. I think reasonable people can disagree about whether I should have announced it and how I should have done it. What's not fair is any implication that the Bureau acted in any way other than independently, competently, and honestly here. That's just not true. I knew this was going to be controversial. I knew there'd be all kinds of rocks thrown. But this organization and the people who did this are honest, independent people. We do not carry water for one side or the other. That's hard for people to see because so much of our country we see things through sides. We are not on anybody's side. This was done exactly the way you would want it to be done. That said, questions are fair. Feedback is fair.
Absolutely. But the foot soldiers, we use that term in the civil rights movement, your agents on the ground, you take issue with whether or not they were compromised or they were adhering to somebody else's message. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. You can call us wrong, but don't call us weasels. We are not weasels. We are honest people, and we did this in that way. Whether you disagree or agree with the result, this was done the way you would want it to be done.
You were able to learn that Mr. Pagliano and Mr. Gambetta, you learned what they had to say. And if anyone who provided statements to the FBI had actually provided evidence that Secretary Clinton had committed a crime, would you then have recommended prosecution to the DOJ?
Oh, yeah. The case was there very aggressively.
You sure you wouldn't have been a little nervous about doing so, a little intimidated?
No, I really don't care.
You don't look like it. You're kind of tall, and that's...
I have a 10-year term. That's the beauty of this. Well, there's a lot of challenging things about this job. One of the great things is I have a certain amount of job security. And so, no, either way, we would have done what the facts told us should be done.
So are you now second-guessing your decision regarding Hillary Clinton?
No.
Let me just say in conclusion,
the time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the Director and ask my colleagues to give the respect that this agency in this instance deserves. Thank you so very much for your service. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I've got a lot of concerns, but one of them refers to Reddit. At the time that the Department of Justice, at your behest or your involvement, gave Paul Gambetta immunity, did you do so knowing about all of the posts he had on Reddit and capturing all of those posts and correspondence where he was asking how to wipe or completely erase on behalf of a VVIP, so to speak?
I'm not sure sitting here. My recollection is, and I'll check this and fix it if I'm wrong, that we had some awareness of the Reddit posts. I don't know whether our folks had read them all or not. We had a pretty good understanding of what we thought he had done, but that's my best recollection.
Okay. In the last week, en masse, he's been deleting them from Reddit posts. Is that consistent with preserving evidence? And I say that because there's still an ongoing interest by Congress, and only in spite of Reddit's own senior, what they call flak team, trying to hide it, only because a few people caught it, do we even know about it, and is this and other committees interested in getting the backups that may exist on these deletions? I guess my question to you is he destroying evidence relevant to congressional inquiries? And I'll answer it for you, yes, he is. And what are you going to do about it?
That's not something I can comment on.
Well, let me go into something that concerns this body in a very specific way. As a former chairman issuing subpoenas, I issued a subpoena, and additionally, I issued preserved letters. In addition to that, now Chairman Chaffetz issued what were effectively preserved letters. Some of them were directly to Hillary Rodham Clinton while she was still Secretary. Others, the subpoena in 2013 was to Secretary Kerry. These individuals destroyed documents pursuant or took it out of Federal custody pursuant to our subpoena and our discovery. As a result, they committed crimes. My question to you is, When I was a chairman and I wanted to grant immunity to somebody, I had to go notice the Department of Justice, and you were consulted. Isn't that correct?
In a particular matter?
In any matter.
I don't know whether the FBI is consulted in that circumstance.
Okay. For the record, yes, the Department of Justice does not grant immunity without checking with federal law enforcement to see whether it will impact any ongoing investigation. That's the reason we have a requirement to give notice. When the reverse was occurring, you were granting, handing out like candy, according to some, immunity. Did you, or to your knowledge, Department of Justice, confer with Chairman Goodlatte, Chairman Chaffetz, Chairman Smith, or any of the other chairmen who had ongoing subpoenas and investigations?
Not to my knowledge.
So isn't there a double standard that when you granted immunity to these 5 individuals, you took them out of the reach of prosecution for crimes committed related to destruction of documents or withholding or other crimes pursuant to congressional subpoenas?
I don't think anybody was given transactional immunity.
Oh, really? Now, we have not allowed to make your immunities public, but I'm going to take the privilege of making one part of it public. I read them. You gave immunity from destruction to both of those attorneys, not just turning them over, the documents over, specifically destruction. You did the same thing with these other 2 individuals, Brian and Paul Cabera. You gave them immunity from destruction.
Yeah, I don't think, well, again, I could always be wrong, but I don't have them in front of me either.
Well, because you don't let us take them out of the SCIF, it's a little hard for us too. But the fact is, when you read them—
my answer? I'm pretty sure that what was granted was use immunity. In the case of those 2 people, coextensive with 18 U.S.C. 6001, which means no statement you make can be used against you directly or indirectly. Transactional immunity is sometimes given also by prosecutors, says you will not be prosecuted in any event for this set of facts. I don't think there was any transactional immunity.
Well, when I read for both of the attorneys that immunity was granted, it's in both cases said destruction, in addition to the turning over. Why was that? Why would you believe that was necessary, or do you believe that would be necessary? You wanted the document. You wanted the physical evidence. Why did you have to give them immunity from destruction of materials? And because my time is expiring, when you look into it and hopefully get back to this committee, I'd like to know, does that immunity apply only to destruction on the computers delivered so that other destructions by Cheryl Mills could still be prosecuted?
Yeah, again, my recollection is no transactional immunity was given. A protection of statements was given to the Combetta guy and Mr. Pagliano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent quickly that a group of documents be included, and I'll summarize them. They're basically the letters and subpoenas that led up to the destruction of documents that were previously held for preservation. Additionally, the blog post from Reddit, if those could all be placed to the record.
Without objection, they will be made a part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Director Comey, would you consider the FBI's most important job presently fighting terrorism and threats to the homeland?
Yes, that's our top priority.
How much time do you think the FBI and you have spent responding to congressional inquiries and on this particular email investigation? Could you give me an idea how many months or years have been expended on responding to the different committees that have called you in time after time after time and repetitiously accused you of doing politics rather than being an FBI director?
I can't. I don't have any sense.
Would it be months of cumulative man-hours, or would it be years of cumulative man-hours?
You know, I don't know. A lot of folks have done a lot of work to try and provide the kind of transparency that we promised. It's been a lot by a lot of people. I just don't have a sense of the—
How many hours have you spent before Congress on this?
Testimony, 4 hours and 40 minutes without a bathroom break, I want to note for the record. And whatever today is, those would be the 2 main appearances. I was asked questions at Senate Homeland yesterday about this, and then House Homeland in July, I think. So I'm guessing 10 hours or so.
And you prepared for this, though. I mean, the 10 hours is just like the iceberg.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Could your time and the FBI times better be used fighting terrorist threats here in America?
You know, we're still doing it all. So no one should think that we've taken a play off because we're also doing oversight. We do it. We do both.
In the case in New York where Mr. Rahami tried to detonate some bombs, did detonate a bomb, his father had accused him of being a terrorist at one time, and he'd stabbed his brother and was in jail. Did the FBI interview him when he was in jail about his possible terrorist tendencies and his trips to Pakistan or Afghanistan?
I'll answer that. I'm trying to be very circumspect in how I answer questions about the case because the guy's alive and is entitled to a fair trial, and so I don't do anything that would allow him to argue he lost the ability to have a fair trial. The answer is we did not interview him when he was in jail in 2014. Yeah.
And why would that be? You interviewed the father, I believe. You might have talked to the brother. You might have talked to a friend. The best evidence was him. He's in jail. You didn't have to, you know. Why did they not go and talk to him?
Yeah, sitting here, I don't want to answer that question yet. I've commissioned, as I do in all of these cases, a deep look back. We're trying to make the case now. We will go back very carefully, try to understand what decisions the agents made who investigated that and why, and whether there is learning from that. So I don't want to answer it just now because I'd be speculating a bit.
Thank you, sir. Some people have suggested you made a political calculation in your recommendation dealing with Secretary Clinton and the emails. Did you make a political calculation in coming to your ultimate decision?
None.
Some said that on national television, that Secretary Clinton's emails were destroyed after a directive from the Clinton campaign. You announced your decision. You stated publicly, and I quote, "We found no evidence that Secretary Clinton's emails were intentionally deleted in efforts to conceal them." Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Others have said they lost confidence in the investigation and questioned the genuine effort in which it was carried out. Did the FBI make a genuine effort to carry out a thorough investigation?
Oh, yes, very much.
And did you take some hits from the position you took when you announced your decision?
A few, yeah.
Difficult.
Difficult, but I just thought it was the right thing to do. I'm not loving this, but I think it's important that I come and answer questions about it. As long as people have questions, I will try to answer them.
You're not loving this. Do you need a bathroom break?
No, I'm good.
Setting a record?
I'll let you know at 4:40.
Thank you, sir. And FBI buildings, we know what they shouldn't be named, and you know my position on that, and I hope you keep that well in mind. You're a credit to the FBI, you're a credit to government service, and to your alma mater. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, Director, for your testimony here before this committee. Again, listening in the exchange between yourself and Mr. Ice, I'd just like to confirm that you were confirming that Mr. Gambetta made the Reddit posts.
Well, I'm confirming it. I think he did, is my understanding. But yeah, that's my understanding. I think he did. I haven't dug into that myself. I've been focused on a lot of other stuff, as we've talked about, but I think that's right.
I certainly can accept that. And I'd like to just go back to the interview with Hillary Clinton and how that all came about on that July 2nd date. But first, I'm looking at the dates of the conditional immunity documents that I've reviewed, and I see that Mr. Pagliano had one dated December 22nd and another one dated December 28th. Can you tell me what brought about that second agreement, why the first one wasn't adequate, and if there was an interview with Mr. Pagliano in between those dates, so December 22nd and 28th of 2015?
I think what it is, and Mr. Gowdy and Mr. Marino will recognize this term, the first one is what we call a Queen for a Day agreement, which was to govern an interview, so limited use immunity for an interview. And then I believe the second one is the agreement for use immunity in connection with the investigation. So it's sort of a tryout for him to get interviewed, for prosecutors and investigators to poke at him, and then the second one is the agreement they reached. I think that's right.
And to the extent of if we're going to go any further, we'll go off of the December 28th agreement. That'd be how I would understand that. in your
I
description?
think they're both important to him and his lawyer, but the first is a intermediate step to the second.
Okay, thank you. Then, were you aware of the President's statement on October 9th, 2015, when he is reported, this is reported on October 9th of 2015, that he said that Hillary Clinton would not have endangered national security?
Obviously, I don't know the dates, but I remember public reporting on a statement like that.
In the fall in October, and I'll state it as the report I have is October 9th. Then again, on April 10th, 2016, it was reported that the President had said that Hillary Clinton was careless but not intentionally endangering national security. Were you aware of that statement as well?
Yes.
And then I'd like you to, if you could characterize the interview. Sometime around, I believe, May 16th, it was reported that you said you intended to interview Hillary Clinton personally.
I never said that because I never intended that. And I'm sure I didn't say that publicly.
Were you aware of the report that was your public statement?
Yes, I think I read it and smiled about it. People imagine the FBI director does things that the FBI director doesn't do.
In fact, and I'm not disputing your answer, I'm just simply, for the record, this is a record that is dated September 28th, 2016, Buffalo News. It's got your picture on it, and takes us back to, that's when it was printed, excuse me, takes us back to a document, May 16th, 2016, has a picture of you in the front of it, and I'll ask you to introduce it into the record. It says, FBI Director James Comey told reporters that he would personally interview Hillary Clinton, quote, in coming days, close quote. And I'd ask unanimous consent to introduce this article into the record.
Without objection, it will be made.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not as a matter of indictment, I don't dispute your word on this. It's what the public expectation was hanging out there is my real point. And then with that public expectation, I think the public was surprised to learn about who was or wasn't in that room. Can you tell us who was in the room involved in either listening to or conducting the interview of Hillary Clinton on that date of July 2nd, 2016?
I can't tell you for sure. I can give you a general sense. The witness and her legal team, and then on our side of the table, our agents, prosecutors from the Department of Justice. I don't know if any of our analysts were in there or not, but sort of our team, their team.
And how many of your team, how many FBI investigators?
I don't know for sure sitting here. I think we probably had 8 to 10 people on our side, prosecutors and agents. That's a knowable fact. I just don't know it sitting here.
Prosecutors. Did Loretta Lynch have her people in there?
If you mean Department of Justice lawyers, yes, sure.
So how many Department of Justice lawyers would have been there?
I don't know for sure. Again, I think it was probably about 8 people, probably about 4 lawyers, about 4 from the FBI.
Okay.
But again, I could be wrong.
I think so. About around 4 investigators, around 4 potential prosecutors from the DOJ, a couple of attorneys for Hillary Clinton herself. That would set the scene fairly closely.
I think that Secretary Clinton's team was bigger than that. I don't know the exact number.
Okay. And then when you received the counsel as to the recommendation you were to make to Loretta Lynch, I'm going to just go through this quickly. You didn't review a videotape, an audio tape, or a transcript, so you would have had to rely upon the briefings from the people that were in the room who would have been your investigative team.
Yes, the agents who conducted the interview, yes.
And they were briefing off of notes that they had taken, which are now in the SCIF, but redacted.
Right, they write them up in what's called an FBI 302.
And so Loretta Lynch had her people in the room, and they would have had access to your investigators in the room. And out of that came a piece of advice to you that she had already said she was going to hand that responsibility over to you as director of the FBI as to making the recommendation, which turned out to be the decision on whether or not to indict Hillary Clinton.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The director will answer the question.
I'm not sure I'm following it entirely. There was no advice to me from the Attorney General or any of the lawyers working for her. My team formulated a recommendation that was communicated to me, and the FBI reached its conclusion as to what to do, uncoordinated from the Department of Justice.
Even though Justice was in the room with your investigators, and I'd make that final comment, and I'd yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Sure.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Russian hacking into the databases of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, as well as Russian hacks into the voter registration systems of Illinois and Arizona, serve as ominous warnings to the American people about the risks that our electoral processes face in this modern era. Unfortunately, Trump Republicans in the House are as obsessed with Hillary Clinton's damn emails as Trump has been about President Obama's birth certificate. Just like the Donald closed his birth certificate investigation after 5 years of fruitless investigation, however, I predict that the Trump Republicans will at some point close this email persecution. The American people are sick of it. The attention of the American public is increasingly focused on the security of this nation's election infrastructure. On Monday, the ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, Senator Dianne Feinstein and Congressman Adam Schiff, issued a joint statement setting forth the current status of this investigation. It said this, and I quote, "Based on briefings we have received, we have concluded that the Russian intelligence agencies are making a serious and concerted effort to influence the U.S. election." They work closely with intelligence community individuals to be able to put that statement out to the American public. Director Comey, I don't want to ask you about any classified information, but is their statement accurate?
I can't comment on that in this forum. As I said in my opening, we are investigating to try to understand exactly what mischief the Russians might be up to in connection with our political institutions and the election system more broadly, but I don't want to comment on that at this point.
Free and fair elections are the linchpin of our society. A compromise or disruption of our election process is something that this Congress certainly should be looking into. Would you agree with that?
I can't speak, sir, to what Congress should be looking into, but the FBI is looking into this very, very hard for the reasons you say. We take this extraordinarily seriously.
Thank you. In June, the FBI Cyber Division issued a flash alert to state officials warning that hackers were attempting to penetrate their election systems. The title of the flash alert was, and I quote, "Targeting Activity Against State Board of Election Systems," end quote. The alert disclosed that the FBI is currently investigating cyber attacks against at least 2 states. Later in June, the FBI warned officials in Arizona about Russian assaults on their election system, and hackers also attacked the election system in Illinois, where they were able to download the data of at least 200,000 or up to 200,000 voters. In August, the Department of Homeland Security convened a conference call warning state election officials and offering to provide federal cybersecurity experts to help scan for vulnerabilities. And yesterday it was announced that at least 18 states have already requested election cybersecurity help to defend their election systems. Director Comey, since these flash alerts and warnings went out over this summer, I'd appreciate you letting us know whether or not there have been any additional attacks on state operations or databases since June.
There have been a variety of scanning activities, which is a preamble for potential intrusion activities, as well as some attempted intrusions at voter registration databases beyond those we knew about in July and August. We are urging the states just to make sure that their deadbolts are thrown and their locks are on, and to get the best information they can from DHS, just to make sure their systems are secure. And again, these are the voter registration systems. This is very different than the vote system in the United States, which is very, very hard for someone to hack into because it's so clunky and dispersed. It's Mary and Fred putting a machine under the basketball hoop at the gym. Those things are not connected to the internet, but the voter registration systems are. So we urge the states to make sure you have the most current information and your systems are tight, because there's no doubt that some bad actors have been poking around.
All right. With that, I will yield back the balance of my time, and thank you, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Comey, thanks for being here. I was a bit astounded when you said the FBI is unable to control who a witness coming in voluntarily brings into an interview. I've seen a lot of FBI agents tell people who could come into an interview and who could not. And in this case, and I'm sure you've heard some of the questions raised by smart lawyers around the country about providing immunity to people like Cheryl Mills in return for her presenting a laptop that you had every authority to get a subpoena, and if you had brought a request for a search warrant, based on what we now know, I would have had no problem signing that warrant so you could go get it anywhere you want. And in fact, I've talked to former U.S. attorneys, AUSAs, who have said if an FBI agent came in and recommended that we give immunity to a witness to get her laptop that we could get with a subpoena or warrant, then I would ask the FBI not to ever allow this agent on a case. Can you explain succinctly why you chose to give immunity without a proffer of what was on the laptop, give immunity to Cheryl Mills while she was an important witness and you could have gotten her laptop with a warrant or subpoena?
Sure. I'll give it my best shot. The immunity we're calling about here, and the details really matter that we're talking about, is act of production immunity, which says we want you to give us a thing. We won't use anything we find on that thing directly against you. Right? It's a fairly...
Well, and I understand that, and I understood that from reading the immunity deal. And that's what's so shocking, because she was working directly with Hillary Clinton, and therefore it's expected, since the evidence indicates she was pretty well copied on so many of the emails that Hillary Clinton was using, that pretty much anything in there would have been usable against her. And you cleaned the slate before you ever knew. Now, some of the immunities you gave, the last paragraph mentions a proffer. Was there a proffer of what the witness would say before the immunity deals were given to those that got those immunities?
Can I answer first, though, your question about why I think it made sense to have active production immunity for Cheryl Mills' laptop?
I'd rather, my time is so limited.
All right,
please.
it's an important question, and I think there's a reasonable answer, but I'll give it another time. I think in at least one of the cases, and I'm mixing up the guys, but with Mr. Gambetta, maybe also with Mr. Pagliano. No, I got that reversed.
It's yes or no. Did you have a proffer from them as to what they would say before you gave them immunity?
I believe there was a proffer session governed by what I just referred to as called a Queen for a Day agreement with at least one of them to try and understand what they would say.
Because the deals that I've seen back 30 years ago before I went to the bench, the FBI would say, you and the DOJ, of course, we know FBI can't give immunity. It has to come from DOJ, just like it's not the FBI's job to say what a reasonable prosecutor should do or not do. You give them the evidence, and then you let them decide. But a proffer is made saying, this is what my client will say. Then the DOJ decides, based on that proffer, here's the plea we'll offer, here's the immunity we'll offer, and if your client deviates from that proffer, the deal's off. You got really nothing substantial. It's as if you went into the investigation determined to give immunity to people instead of getting a warrant. You gave immunity to people that you would need to make a case if a case were going to be made. And I know we have people across the aisle that are saying, well, it's only because she's a presidential candidate. It happens to be, in my case, I wouldn't care whether she was a presidential candidate or not. What is important to maintaining a civilization with justice and fairness is a little righteousness where people are treated fairly across the board. And it does not appear that in this case it comports with anything that FBI agents with centuries of experience have told me they've never seen anything like this. So one other thing, I know this happened before your watch, but under Director Mueller, Kim Jensen, who prepared 700 pages of training material for those who would go undercover and try to embed with al-Qaeda, it was wiped out because CARE and some of the people that were unindicted co-conspirators named in your Holy Land Foundation trial, they said we don't like them. They do not allow agents to know what Kim Jensen put in that 700 pages that was so accurate, so good about Islam, that we could embed people in al-Qaeda and they wouldn't suspect them. I would encourage you to start training your FBI agents so whether they're in San Bernardino, Orlando, New Jersey, wherever, they can talk to a radicalized Islamist and determine whether they're radicalized. Without Kim Jensen's type material, you'll never be able to spot them again, and we'll keep having people die. Thank you. My time's expired.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The Director is permitted to respond if he chooses to do so.
I don't think I have anything at this point.
The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director Comey, during this committee's oversight hearing last year, I asked you about the cases of Sherry Chen and Xiaoshang Qi, both U.S. citizens who were arrested by the FBI, accused of different crimes related to economic espionage for China, only to have those charges dropped without explanation. Since you last testified before the committee, both cases have been closed. Now, I know that you may not be personally familiar with the individual's cases or may not be inclined to comment on the facts of these cases to the committee today. However, would you be willing to provide a written explanation or possibly a summary of the investigations to clarify how and why the FBI handled the cases the way they did?
I don't want to commit to that sitting here. We would certainly consider what we can supply consistent with things like the Privacy Act, but we'll certainly consider it. I'm familiar with the case. I remember your questions about it last year, and so we'll take a look at what we can share with you. We can't obviously do it in an open forum in any event.
I understand that, but I appreciate the consideration. Now I'd like to address a different topic. Director Comey, your agency recently introduced an online initiative aimed at promoting education and awareness about violent extremism called Don't Be a Puppet. This program was designed to serve as a tool for teachers and students to prevent young people from being drawn toward violent extremism. However, national education groups, faith groups, and community organizations have raised serious concerns about the way in which the program presents the problem of violent extremism. Particularly troublesome is the website's charge that teachers and students should look for warning signs that a person may be on a slippery slope of violent extremism and to report activity that may or may not be indicative of radicalization. For instance, the website encourages students and teachers to report when others use unusual language or talk about traveling to suspicious places. The user of the website, however, is left to draw inferences about what constitutes a suspicious place or what language is unusual enough to be reported to a trusted authority. For example, a trip to France or Germany, which hosts many far-right extremist groups, may not sound suspicious to many users, but a trip to Saudi Arabia or Iraq, home to various Muslim holy sites, possibly would. So, on August 9th, the American Federation of Teachers led a number of national groups in a letter written to you, and Mr. Chair, I'd like to submit this for the record. And among the many concerns they raise is the potential for such initiatives to exacerbate the profiling and bullying of students of Middle Eastern background and what they over and above what they already experience. So how do you respond to the concerns expressed by the American Federation of Teachers about the impact of the FBI's Don't Be a Puppet program and the effect it may have on schools and immigrant communities?
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad they shared their feedback. Boy, I hope either before or after the feedback they go on and actually go through the don't be a puppet, because I've done it. I honestly can't understand the concerns. It's a very common sense thing. One of our big challenges is how, if a kid starts to go sideways towards violence, the people closest to him are going to see something likely. How do we get folks to a place where they're sensitized to make common sense judgments that this person may be headed in a very dangerous direction? It's never going to be perfect, but I actually think a lot of thought went into this, including faith groups, all kinds of civic groups, to make sure we got something that was good, common sense education for kids and for teachers. And so I'm a little bit at a loss. Maybe we ought to meet with them. They can show me which parts of it they actually think are problematic. But I think it's a pretty darn good piece of work is my overall reaction.
So Director Comey, you've gone to the website and looked at it. So what then would you consider to be a place that sounds suspicious, or what would you consider to be an unusual language that somebody is speaking, so much so that a student should report them to the authorities?
I think what it says is using unusual language, not speaking Pashto or French or German. I think it means speaking in an unusual way about things. And suspicious place, Syria, leaps to my mind. If someone is talking to classmates about thinking about traveling to Syria, the classmates ought to be sensitized to that. The teacher ought to be sensitized to it so we can try and intervene with that kid before we have to lock them up for most of their life.
But do you have evidence to show that this program is actually countering recruiting efforts by violent extremists?
I don't, but it sure makes a lot of sense to me. It seems like, again, a common sense way to equip kids to resist the siren song that comes from radical Islamists or skinhead groups or hate groups of different kinds. And so, look, I'm sure it's not perfect, because nothing in life is. We'd welcome feedback, but the general idea makes a lot of sense to me.
I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, in your opening comments, you said this was an unusual case. I would say that's the understatement of the year. Husband of the subject meets with the Attorney General 3 days before Secretary Clinton is interviewed by the FBI. 9 people get to sit in with Secretary Clinton during that interview. One of those was her Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills, who was the subject of the investigation. 5 people get some kind of immunity. 5 people get some kind of immunity, yet no one is prosecuted. 3 of those people who get immunity take the 5th in front of Congress, and one of them doesn't even bother to show up when he's subpoenaed. He's supposed to have been at that very chair you're sitting at. And of course, the Attorney General announces that she's going to follow your recommendations, even though she doesn't know what those recommendations are, the only time she's ever done that. So of course this was unusual. We've never seen anything like this, which sort of brings me to the post. I'd like to put up the post that some have talked about, which is the post by Mr. Combetta on Reddit. And you said earlier that you don't know if you examined this during your investigation, so let's examine it now. I need to strip out a VIP's address from a bunch of archived email. Basically, they don't want the VIP's email address exposed to anyone. Now, Director, when I hear the term strip out email address, I think of somebody's trying to hide something, somebody's trying to cover up something, and it sort of raises an important question from these 2 sentences. Who's the they who wants something hid, and who's the VIP who also wants something hid? Director Comey, is it likely the VIP well, actually not just a VIP, it's a very, very important person according to Mr. Combetta. Is it likely that person is Secretary Clinton?
Yes, sure.
Okay, and is it also likely that the they refers to her Secretary Clinton's staff and specifically Cheryl Mills?
I don't know that. Either her lawyers or some staff that had tasked him with the production.
So one other thing that's important on that, if we could put that back up, one other thing that's important is the date. The date at the top says July 24th, 2014. So whenever I see a date, I'm sure you do the same thing, I always look at what's happening about that same time frame, what may have happened directly before that, and maybe directly after that. So I went back to your reports that you guys had given to us. The first report back last month, August 18th, 2016, page 15. On page 15 it says, during the summer of 2014, State Department indicated to Cheryl Mills a request for Clinton's work-related emails would be forthcoming. State Department gives Cheryl Mills a heads up that she's got to go round up all of Secretary Clinton's email. On that same page it says the House Select Committee on Benghazi had reached an agreement with the State Department regarding production of documents on July 23rd, 2014, just the day before, which I find kind of interesting. Then from your report that we got just last week, After reviewing several documents dated in and around July 23, 2014, Paul Combetta had a conversation with Cheryl Mills. And after reviewing a July 24th, there's that date again, 2014 email from Brian Pagliano, Paul Combetta explained Cheryl Mills was concerned Clinton's then current email address would be disclosed publicly. So, sure looks to me like it's Secretary Clinton, as you said, but also that it's Cheryl Mills and Brian Pagliano who are urging Mr. Combetta to cover this stuff up. You agree?
From what you read, it sure sounds like they're trying to figure out a way to strip out the actual email address from what they produce.
Well, they're actually trying to strip it all out. PST file, everything. Here's the takeaway in my mind. Mills gets a heads up, Cheryl Mills gets a heads up in midsummer of 2014. July 23rd, the day before Mr. Combetta's Reddit post, the Benghazi Committee and the State Department reach an agreement on production of documents. Cheryl Mills has a conversation with Paul Combetta. He goes on Reddit then and tries to figure out how he can get rid of all this email. Even though he's not successful then, he has to do it later down the road with BleachBit. And then the clincher. Just last week, he's going online and trying to delete these Reddit posts. He's trying to cover up his tracks. He's trying to cover up the cover-up. So I guess the question is, and someone's asked it earlier, in light of all this, are you thinking about reopening the investigation?
I may have misunderstood what you said during the question. I don't understand that to be talking about deleting the emails. I understand to be talking about removing from the from line the actual email address. But anyhow, maybe I misunderstood you. But
the same guy later took BleachBit and did delete emails.
Sure. Yeah.
So my question is, the guy you gave immunity to, the guy who took the fifth in front of us, is online trying to figure out how to remove email addresses, change evidence, later uses BleachBit. That guy, who won't testify in front of Congress, and he has correspondence with Cheryl Mills, a subject of the investigation, Cheryl Mills, who also got some kind of immunity agreement, Cheryl Mills, who walked out for part of the questions during the interview with the FBI. Seems to me that's pretty compelling, and the timeline's pretty compelling as well.
I'm not following compelling of what? There's no doubt that Combetta was involved in deleting emails.
After conversations with Cheryl Mills.
He had the OSHIT moment, as he told us, and that's why it was very important for us to interview this guy to find out who told you to do that, why did you do that. That's why he was given use of it.
Did you know about the Reddit post when you interviewed him?
As I said earlier, I think we did. I think our investigators did. I'm not positive as I sit here.
Mr. Chairman, the guy's trying to cover up the Reddit post where he's trying to figure out how he can cover up the email addresses, and I find that compelling, particularly in light of the fact that just the day before, he's talking with Cheryl Mills, and the State Department is on notice that the Benghazi Committee wants these very documents. I find that compelling, but obviously the FBI didn't, and this is just one more in that list of things that make this case highly unusual. I yield back.
The Director is permitted to respond if he chooses to do so.
No, I don't think so.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, the FBI is tasked with very serious responsibilities. You're on the front lines trying to prevent terrorist attacks. You're investigating public corruption. And as I told your agents on a recent visit to your Miami field office, I am grateful to you and your agents, all of the women and men of the FBI, for your dedication to and commitment to the pursuit of justice. We're most grateful. Now, one critical responsibility of the FBI is to investigate when American citizens violate federal laws involving improper contacts with foreign governments. And Director Comey, if an American national goes outside government channels to negotiate with a foreign government on behalf of the United States, that's a very, very serious crime, one that would violate the Logan Act, which, as you know, is the law that prohibits unauthorized people from negotiating with foreign governments in the place of the United States government. Director Comey, would the FBI take allegations of Logan Act violations seriously? Is that within your jurisdiction?
Yes, it's within our jurisdiction.
And if you had credible evidence that someone had violated the Logan Act, would the FBI investigate that alleged violation of law?
I think we have done many Logan Act investigations over the years, and we certainly will in the future.
And am I correct in assuming that you're familiar with publicly quoted comments from various intelligence sources that have said that Russia has targeted the United States with illegal state-directed hacking?
I'm aware of the published reports.
If an American citizen, Director Comey, conducted meetings with a Russian individual who has been sanctioned by the United States about potential weakening of U.S. sanctions policy in violation of the Logan Act, would the FBI investigate?
I don't think it's appropriate to answer that. That gets too close to confirming or denying whether we have an investigation. It seems too close to real life, so I'm not going to comment.
Okay, but you have investigated Logan Act violations. It's something that's clearly within your jurisdiction. I appreciate, Director Comey, your confirming that the FBI would treat these potential violations of law both seriously and urgently, because everything that I just outlined that you said the FBI would investigate has apparently happened already. Public reports suggest that the Logan Act may have been violated by Carter Page, one of the men Donald Trump singled out as the top foreign policy advisor, though now the campaign appears eager to revise Mr. Page's role, given the attention rightly being given to his illicit negotiations with a sanctioned Russian official. I've read reports from Yahoo News from last week that law enforcement may already be looking into this issue, and I assume we all agree that the allegations are very serious. Russia, a nation that hacks America, a nation that continues to enable the Assad regime to slaughter the Syrian people, a nation that threatens and violates the territorial integrity of its neighbors and our European allies. It is a dangerous violation of federal law if Donald Trump's advisor, Carter Page, is engaging in freelance negotiations with Russia. And here's what we know. In March, Donald Trump named Carter Page as a foreign policy advisor. In July, Mr. Page traveled to Moscow to give a speech that was harshly critical of the United States. And during that trip, Mr. Page is reported to have also met with a Russian official named Igor Sechin, a member of Vladimir Putin's inner circle and the president of the petroleum company Rosneft, who was sanctioned by the United States under Executive Order 13361, prohibiting him from traveling to the United States or conducting business with U.S. firms. So Mr. Sechin has a clear and personal interest in lifting U.S. sanctions against him and other top Russian officials put in place by President Obama after Russia's military action in Ukraine. Now, if these two men met to discuss sanctions policy or a lifting of sanctions under a potential Trump administration, this would be enormously concerning. Just last week, the press reported that U.S. intelligence officials are seeking to determine whether an American businessman identified by Donald Trump as one of his foreign policy advisors has opened up private communications with senior Russian officials, including talks about possible lifting of sanctions. Mr. Comey, it is illegal if Trump's advisor met with Russians who have been sanctioned by the United States about lifting these sanctions, and I am grateful for your reassurances this morning that the FBI would investigate potential violations of the Logan Act by any individual who engages in unauthorized negotiations with a foreign government. I remind my colleagues that Donald Trump invited Russia to hack the United States. I remind my colleagues that Donald Trump suggested breaking America's long-standing commitment to our NATO allies and weakening U.S. sanctions against Russia. Is there a connection between these reckless and dangerous policy proposals and the potential violation of the Logan Act by Donald Trump's Russia advisor? Mr. Comey, we appreciate very much the FBI's vigilance in pursuing justice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman is permitted to respond if he chooses to do so. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director, for being here. I think we worked on a couple of cases together, our districts. Would you clarify something for me on active production immunity? Does active production immunity go beyond this scenario that I'm going to state? You ask for a computer from a witness. You give that witness act of production immunity that, in my interpretation, is that the agent who has that now in his or her hands, the witness is immune from the agent getting on the stand and saying, that person, this is that person's computer because they gave it to me. Does it go beyond that? Or Or was there additional immunity for Ms. Mills stating that anything on that computer cannot be used against her?
As I recall it, Congressman, the active production immunity for Ms. Mills was, you give us this computer, we will not use, we the Justice Department, anything we find on the computer directly against you in connection with investigation or prosecution for mishandling of classified information. I think that's how they defined it.
But that goes beyond act of production. Doesn't act of production simply state that I'm the agent, I can't get on the stand and say that belongs to that individual because they simply gave it to me? It sounds like more additional immunity was given that says, and what is on this we cannot hold against you.
Well, I think of it as I still think of it as an active production immunity. That, from my experience, that's what I would characterize that agreement. I guess you're right, there could be a more limited form of active production immunity, which simply says your fact of giving us this object will not be used against you directly. I'd have to think through whether it can be parsed that way, but I think I take your point.
So that's why I'm saying additional immunity was given, and I don't think it was warranted at that point. Let me ask you guys, we both impaneled many grand juries, investigative grand juries. Why not impanel an investigative grand jury whereby you have reasonable suspicion that a crime may have been committed, and then you have the ability to get warrants, subpoenas, get this information, subpoena witnesses before the grand jury under oath, and if they take the fifth, if it's not the target, if they take the fifth, they simply and say, I'm not going to talk to you, you can give them, whether it's use immunity, the AG can give them that, and you had that authority, and then transactional has to come from the judge. And if they refuse to testify then you can say, fine, we're going to take you before a judge, hold you in contempt, and then you're going to sit in jail until you answer our questions. Wouldn't that have been much simpler and more effective than the way this has gone about? I know that I've done it many, many times, and sometimes we find a situation where there isn't enough evidence, and most of the time we find there is enough evidence.
Yeah, no, it's a reasonable question. And I don't want to talk about grand jury in connection with this case.
That's why I posed it the way I did.
Right. From our training, we know we're never supposed to talk about grand jury publicly, but I can answer more generally than that. If anytime you're talking about the prospect of subpoenaing a computer from a lawyer that involves the lawyer's practice of law, you know you're getting into a big Megillah.
Okay, please let me interrupt you.
Sure.
I understand that clearly. Why did you not decide to go to an investigative grand jury? It would have been cleaner, it would have been much simpler, and you would have had more authority to make these witnesses testify. Not the target, but the witness testify. That seems the way to go, Director. We've done it thousands of times. This just was too convoluted.
Yeah, again, I need to steer clear of talking about grand jury use in a particular matter. In general, in my experience, you can often do things faster with informal agreements, especially when you're interacting with lawyers. In this particular investigation, the investigative team really wanted to get access to the laptops that were used to sort these emails.
Okay, one more
Those are lawyers' laptops. That is a very complicated thing. I think they were able to navigate it pretty well to get us access.
The media says that Ms. Clinton repeated, the media says, 41 times that I do not recall or do not remember, or variations of that. Is that a fact? Or?
I don't know. I'm not counted. I've read the 302, obviously.
Wouldn't that be taken into consideration?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't that selective memory be taken into consideration?
Sure. The nature and quality of a subject's memory is always a factor.
Right. My time has expired. Thank you, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington State, Ms. Delbaney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Comey, for spending all this time with us today. In 2010, the White House set up the Vulnerabilities Equities Process, the VEP, and implemented it in 2014. So it could give the government a process for determining whether, how, and when to disclose vulnerabilities to technology companies so that they would be able to address those vulnerabilities and patch them. And in a couple situations, I know there was disclosure from the FBI in April of this year. The FBI informed Apple of a security flaw in older versions of iOS and OS X. Its first vulnerability disclosure to Apple under the vulnerability equities process. In May of this year, the FBI Cyber Division warned the private sector about a fake USB device charger that can log the keystrokes of certain wireless keyboards. And that was 15 months after the FBI discovered the vulnerability. In the warning, the FBI stated, quote, if placed strategically in an office or other location where individuals might use wireless devices, a malicious cyber actor could potentially harvest personally identifiable information, intellectual property, trade secrets, passwords, or other sensitive information, end quote. Other instances of the FBI using the VEP are scarce. And indeed, there have been reports that it's rare for the FBI to use this process. And so I wanted to ask you why this is and what's your view of the process.
Thank you for that question. The process seems to me to be a reasonable process to in a structured fashion, bring everybody who might have an optic on this in the government together to talk about how do we think about disclosing a particular vulnerability to the private sector as against the equities that may be at stake in terms of national security in particular. And so I think it makes sense to have such a process. The FBI participates in it when we come across a vulnerability that we know the vulnerability and that falls within the VEP's jurisdiction. I don't know the particulars of the case. You said there was a 15-month delay in disclosing a particular vulnerability. I don't know enough to react to that. Probably wouldn't react in an open forum in any event, but that's my overall reaction.
And does every vulnerability you discover go through this process in terms of understanding whether or not you would disclose?
I think there's a definition of what falls under the process. You have to know the vulnerability. So we have to have knowledge of, so what is it that allows it, the vulnerability to be exploited? We didn't, for example, in the San Bernardino case. We bought access, but we didn't know the vulnerability, what was behind it. But I forget the definition as I sit here of which vulnerabilities have to be considered.
And so is there another process that you might use that's different from the VEP when you're looking at
I don't know
vulnerabilities and whether
Before
or not
the VEP, I know our folks would routinely have making disclosure to private entities, but I don't think I don't know of a process outside of VEP.
And so, but you're not sure if in every situation the VEP is used whenever you discover a vulnerability?
Sounds like a circular answer, but if it's and obviously I didn't read the VEP before coming here today. We could get smart on it very quickly and have somebody talk to you about it. But if it falls in the definition of things that have to be discussed at the VEP, of course we do. I just can't remember what that definition is exactly.
Okay, I'm trying to understand if a vulnerability is discovered, if there's always a standard process that you would go through to understand whether or not that information would be disclosed, and if that process is the VEP. Yeah,
that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, whether there's a set of vulnerabilities that would fall outside of the VEP process, and if that's the case, how do we deal with it? I don't know sitting here.
Thanks. If you have other feedback on that, I'd appreciate it at another time.
Okay.
In August, you said that stakeholders needed to take some time to collect information on the going dark issue and come back afterward to have an adult conversation. And I agree with you. And so I wondered if you would agree that there's room for us to work together on ways to help law enforcement that don't include mandating a backdoor.
Totally. I keep reading that I'm an advocate of backdoors. I want to mandate backdoors. I am not. I have never advocated we have to have backdoors. We have to figure out how we can solve this problem together, and it has to be everybody who cares about it coming together to talk about it. I don't know exactly what the answer is, frankly. I can see the problem, which I think is my job, is to tell people the tools you're counting on us to use to keep you safe, they're less and less effective. That's a big problem. But what to do and how to do it is a really complicated thing, and I think everybody has to participate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Chair thanks the gentlewoman. Recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by acknowledging progress. I think it's important that we do so. This morning, we've had 9 straight Democrats talk to the FBI about emails without asking for immunity. That's a record. And I suspect the reason that they have not asked for immunity from Director Comey is they would say they've done nothing wrong. I find that interesting because that's exactly what Heather Samuelson and Cheryl Mills' attorneys said. In fact, they said it just a few days ago, and I'll quote it. The FBI considered my clients to be witnesses and nothing more. And then Ms. Mills and Ms. Samuelson's attorney said this. I think this is the most interesting part. The Justice Department assured us my clients did nothing wrong. Well, Mr. Chairman, if you're assuring subjects or targets or what witnesses, whatever you want to call them, that they've done nothing wrong, it does beg the question, what are you seeking and receiving immunity from? I mean, if you've done nothing wrong, laptops don't go to the Bureau of Prisons, Mr. Chairman. People do. So the immunity was not for the laptop. The immunity was for Cheryl Mills. And if the Department of Justice says you've done nothing wrong, it does beg the question of why you are seeking or receiving immunity. And it could be, Mr. Chairman, for a couple of different, it could be for the classified information that was the genesis of the investigation. It could be for the destruction of federal records which came from that initial investigation, or it could be both. Mr. Comey, I want to ask you this. Did the Bureau interview everyone who originated an email that ultimately went to Secretary Clinton that contained classified information?
I don't think so. Nearly everyone, but not everyone.
Well, you and I had a discussion the last time about intent. You and I see the statute differently. My opinion doesn't matter. Yours does. You're the head of the Bureau. But in my judgment, you read an element into the statute that does not appear on the face of the statute. And then we had a discussion about intent. So why would you not interview the originator of the email to, number one, determine whether or not that originator had a conversation with the secretary herself?
There were a handful of people who the team decided it wasn't a smart use of resources to track down. One was a civilian in Japan, as I recall, who had forwarded something that somehow got classified as it went up, and the other were a group of low-level State Department people deployed around the world who had written things that ended up being classified. Nearly everyone was interviewed, but there was a small group that the team decided it isn't worth the resources.
Well, to that extent, if you interview the overwhelming majority of the originators of the email, will you make those 302s available to Congress? Because I counted this morning 30-something 302s that we do not have.
Okay. I'll go back and check. My goal is maximum transparency, consistent with our obligations under the law. I'll check on that.
Well, and I appreciate it for this reason. Intent is awfully hard to prove. Very rarely do defendants announce ahead of time, I intend to commit this crime on this date. Go ahead and check the code section. I'm going to do it. That rarely happens. So you have to prove it by circumstantial evidence, such as whether or not the person intended to set up an email system outside the State Department, such as whether or not the person knew or should have known that his or her job involved handling classified information, whether or not the person was truthful about the use of multiple devices, whether or not the person knew that a frequent emailer to her had been hacked, and whether she took any remedial steps after being put on notice that your email or someone who's been emailing with you prolifically had been hacked, and whether or not, and I think you would agree with this, Director, false exculpatory statements are gold in a courtroom. I would rather have a false exculpatory statement than a confession. I would rather have someone lie about something and it be provable that that is a lie, such as that I neither sent nor received classified information, such as that I turned over all of my work-related emails. All of that, to me, goes to the issue of intent. So I got two more questions, then I'm going to be out of time. For those who may have to prosecute these cases in the future, what would she have had to do to warrant your recommendation of a prosecution? If all of that was not enough, because all of that's what she did, if all of that's not enough, I mean, surely you cannot be arguing that you have to have an intent to harm the United States to be subject to this prosecution. I mean, that's treason. That's not a violation of this statute.
No, I think we'd have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt a general awareness of the unlawfulness of your conduct. You knew you were doing something you shouldn't do. And then, obviously that's on the face of the statute itself, then you need to consider, so who else has been prosecuted and what circumstances, because it's all about prosecutorial judgment. But those two things would be the key questions. Can you prove that the person knew they were doing something they shouldn't do, a general criminal intent, general mens rea,
but the way to
treated other people similarly?
The way to prove that is whether or not someone took steps to conceal or destroy what they've done. That is the best evidence you have, that they knew it was wrong, that they lied about it.
It's very good evidence. Always want to look at what the subject said about their conduct.
Well, and there's a lot. There's a lot. If you saw her initial press conference, it all falls under the heading of false exculpatory statement. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but the director did. You started off by giving us examples of things the Bureau has done. And every one of us who's worked with the FBI, that is the FBI that I know. The one that went and saved that girl in North Carolina, that is the FBI that I know. What concerns me, Director, is when you have 5 immunity agreements and no prosecution, when you are allowing witnesses who happen to be lawyers, who happen to be targets, to sit in on an interview. That is not the FBI that I used to work with. So I've been really careful to not criticize you. In fact, I said it again this morning. They wanted to know, was he gotten to? Did somebody corrupt him? No, I just disagree with you. But it's really important to me that the FBI be respected. And you got to help us understand. Because it looks to me like some things were done differently that I don't recall being done back when I used to work with them. And with that, I would yield back to the chairman.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, you may.
I hope someday when the political craziness is over, you will look back again on this, because this is the FBI you know and love. This was done by pros in the right way. That's the part I have no patience for. Sorry, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Comey, for your extraordinary service to our country. And please convey to the professionals at the FBI my gratitude for their exemplary service to the people of this country. And particularly, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary, prompt, and effective response to the recent bombings in New Jersey and New York. It's just another example of this extraordinary agency and your extraordinary leadership. Director Comey, many of us have expressed a concern about the growing incidence of gun violence in this country, and we expressed condolences and concern following the recent mass shootings in Burlington, Washington, where 5 people lost their lives. We shared the same sentiments after incidents in Aurora and Newtown and Charleston, but as more Americans lose their lives to senseless gun violence, this Congress has been absolutely silent and inactive on this issue. So I'd like to really turn to you in your career in public service, and both as a U.S. Attorney and now as the FBI Director, with so much experience in dealing with the consequences of gun violence, and ask you to kind of share with us what you think might be some things Congress could do to help reduce gun violence in this country. I know, if I recall correctly, in 2013 during our confirmation hearings, you at least alluded to your support for universal background checks, bans on illegal trafficking of guns, assault weapons, and high-capacity magazines. So I'm wondering what you think would be effective for us to do to help reduce the incidence of gun violence in this country.
No, thank you, Congressman. And you're exactly right. We just spend a lot of time thinking, investigating, and mourning the deaths in mass shootings. I think it's really important, though, the Bureau not be in the policy business and be in the enforcement business. And so I'm going to respectfully avoid your question, honestly, because I think we should not be in the place of, we should be a factual input to you. We should not be suggesting particular laws with respect to guns or anything else.
So let me ask you, Director, about a very specific enforcement challenge. I introduced a piece of legislation called the Unlawful Gun Buyer Alert Act to get at this issue of a default proceeds. This is where people buy a gun, they purchase a gun, but they are not permitted to buy one under law, but the 3-day time period has elapsed. And between 2010 and 2014, 15,729 sales to prohibited persons occur. That means people who are not lawfully permitted to buy a gun got a gun 15,000 times. So my legislation would require that when that happens, that local law enforcement is notified. They can then make a decision. Should we go prosecute this person who's now in possession of a gun illegally? Should we, execute a search warrant? But they would at least be put on notice. In your community, a person who should not have a gun bought one, so they can take some action. Would that make sense in terms of your enforcement responsibilities?
It might. I know ATF is notified in those circumstances.
Which, of course, is a very different set of priorities for ATF. Do they go and actually execute a warrant and charge somebody? But there are state and local prohibitions on that that could be acted upon. So would it also make sense to notify local law enforcement?
It might. I'd want to think through and ask ATF how do they think through the deconfliction issues that might arise there, but it's a reasonable thing to look at.
My next question, Director, is there has been a recent discussion about implementing stop and frisk in cities to address crime, even at the national level. And although the data shows that this disproportionately targets people of color, and just to give you some context, in 2011, when stop and frisk activity reached an all-time high in New York City, police stopped 685,000 people. 53% of those individuals were black, 34% were Latino, and 9% were white. More than half were ages 14 to 24 years old. And of the 685,000 people that were stopped and frisked, 88% were neither arrested nor received any sort of citation. Do you believe this stop and frisk policy is an effective tactic to address crime in our nation's cities? What would a federal implementation look like that Mr. Trump has called for? And how can Congress minimize racial profiling and discriminatory, ineffective techniques like stop and frisk, and instead promote activities that build trust and confidence between the police and the community?
I don't know what a federal program would look like because we're not in the policing business. We're investigative agencies at the federal level. But the Terry stop, the stop and frisk is not a term we use in the federal system. The Terry stop, which is a stop of an individual based on reasonable suspicion that they're engaged in criminal activity, is a very important law enforcement tool. To my mind, its effectiveness depends upon the conversation after the stop. When it's done well, someone is stopped, then they are told, I stopped you because. We have a report of a guy with a gray sweatshirt who matches you. That's why I stopped you, sir. I'm sorry. Or I stopped you because I saw you do this behavior. Because the danger is what's an effective law enforcement technique can become a source of estrangement for a community, and you need the help of the community. So it's an important tool when used right, and what makes the difference between right and wrong is what's the nature of the conversation with the person you stopped.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to finally associate myself with the remarks of Congressman Deutsch regarding the Logan Act violations and the remarks of many of my colleagues regarding the attempts by the Russians to interfere with our democracy and electoral process, and take great comfort in the Director's commitment to continue to understand this as an important responsibility of the agency to protect the integrity of our democracy. And with that, I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, and as I do so, I want to thank him for making, as chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, this very nice hearing room available to us while the Judiciary Committee hearing room is under renovation. So, gentlemen is recognized for 5 minutes with my thanks.
Well, and I appreciate the extra 5 minutes of questioning for doing so, so thank you very much. Director, thank you for your accessibility. You have been very readily available, and we do appreciate that. This investigation started because the Inspector General found classified information in a non-secure setting, and the FBI went to a law firm and found this information. They seized at least one computer and at least one thumb drive. Did you need an immunity agreement to get those?
It was not. I don't think there was immunity. In fact, I'm certain there was no immunity agreement used in connection with that.
So, did it really take the FBI a full year to figure out that Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson also had computers with classified information on?
No. It took us to that point in the investigation to insist that we try to get them.
Were you getting them because they had classified information or because there was some other information you wanted?
No, we thought those were the tools, as we understood it, that have been used to sort the emails. And the investigative team very much wanted to understand, if they could, whether there was an electronic hail of how that had been done. Because the big issue was, what did they delete, what did they keep? And
but why did you need an immunity agreement? Why didn't they just cooperate and hand them over? The law firm did, didn't they?
Well, yes. That's a question really I can't answer. That's between a lawyer and her client and the Justice Department lawyers. For whatever reason, her lawyer thought it was in her interest to get an active production immunity agreement with the Department of Justice.
The FBI interviewed David Kendall's partner, but did not interview David Kendall. Why didn't you interview David Kendall?
I don't remember. I don't remember that decision.
Going back to this Reddit post, this is put up on July 24th of 2014. You believe this to be associated with Mr. Gambetta, correct?
Yes, I think that's right.
This is the one that Mr. Jordan put up about the need to strip out a VIP's very VIP email address and a bunch of archived email. This is he's referring to a federal record, isn't he?
I don't know exactly which records he's referring to.
How is this not a conscious effort to alter federal records? I mean, the proximity to the date is just stunning.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
How is this not a conscious effort to alter a federal record?
Well, it depended on what the record was and exactly what he was trying to do, and whether there would be disclosure to the people they were producing it to, saying we changed this for privacy purposes. I just don't know sitting here.
These are documents that were under subpoena. These federal records were under subpoena. They were under a preservation order. Did Mr. Gambetta destroy documents?
I don't know whether that was true in July of 2014. They were under subpoena.
Did he ultimately destroy federal records, Mr. Gambetta?
Oh, I have no reason to believe he destroyed federal records.
He used bleach bit, did he not?
Yeah, the question is what was already produced before he used the bleach bit. He definitely, the reason he wanted immunity was he had done the bleach bit business after there was publicity about the demand from Congress for the records. That's a potential.
And not just publicity, there was a subpoena.
Right, that's potential.
And there was communication from Cheryl Mills that there was a preservation order, correct?
Yes.
And he did indeed use bleach bit on these records.
Sure. That's why the guy wouldn't talk to us without immunity.
And so when you got immunity, what did you learn?
We learned that no one had directed him to do that, that he had done it.
You really think that he just did this by himself?
I think his account, again, I never affirmatively believe anybody except my wife, but the question is, do I have evidence to disbelieve him? And I don't. His account is credible, that he was told to do it in 2014, screwed up and didn't do it, panicked when he realized he hadn't, and then raced back in and did it after Congress asked for the records and the New York Times wrote about them. That was his SHIT moment. And that was credible. Again, I don't believe people, but we did not have evidence to disbelieve that and establish someone told him to do that. No email, no phone call, nothing. The hope was, if he had been told to do that, that would be a great piece of evidence. If we give him immunity, maybe he'll tell us, so-and-so told me to, so-and-so asked me to, and then we're working up the chain.
But he did indeed destroy federal records, and he was told at some point to do this, correct? Who told him to do that initially? When he was supposed to do it in December, and he didn't do it. Who told him to do that?
One of Secretary Clinton's staff members, I can't remember sitting here, we know that. One of her lawyers might have been Cheryl Mills. Someone on the team said, we don't need those emails anymore, get rid of the archive file.
This is what's unbelievable about this, because there's classified information, there are federal records that were indeed destroyed. And that's just the fact pattern. Let's go back to this. Here's the other thing that I draw to your attention that is new. September 15th of this year, I issued a subpoena from the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. On these Reddit posts, 4 days later, they were destroyed or taken down. They were deleted. I would hope the FBI would take that into consideration. Again, we're trying under a properly issued subpoena to get to this information. Let's go to Heather Mills real quick. How does in the 2016 interview with Cheryl Mills, she says, quote, Mills did not learn, in the interview report, the interview summary from the FBI, Mills did not learn Clinton was using a private email server until after Clinton's tenure. Also, you have this interview with Mr. Pagliano, who said he approached Quote, Pagliano then approached Cheryl Mills in her office and relayed a State Department employee's concerns regarding federal records retention and the use of a private server. Pagliano remembers Mills replying that former secretaries of state had done similar things, to include Colin Powell. It goes then on to a page 10, and this is what I don't understand. The FBI writes, Clinton's immediate aides, to include Mills, Abedin, Sullivan, and a redacted name, told the FBI they were unaware of the existence of a private server until after Clinton's tenure at State or when it became public knowledge. But if you look back at the email from Heather Mills, if you go back to 2010, this is to Justin Cooper, okay? Mills to Cooper, who does not, he works for Clinton's. He doesn't work for the State Department. FYI, HRC email coming back. Is server okay? Cooper writes back, you are funny. We're on the same server. She knew there was a server. When there was a problem with Hillary Rodham Clinton's emails, what did they do? She called the person who has no background in this, who's not a State Department employee, no security clearance, and then tells the FBI, well, I never knew about that. But there's direct evidence that contradicts this. How do you come to that conclusion and write that in the summary statement that she had no knowledge of this?
That's a question?
The time of the gentleman has expired, but the director will answer the question.
I don't remember exactly sitting here. Having done many investigations myself, there's always conflicting recollections of facts, some of which are central, some of which are peripheral. I don't remember sitting here about that one.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Director Comey, violent crime is up in this country, isn't it?
Our UCR stats we just released show a rise in homicide and other violent crime in 15.
The violent crime, I think, was about 4%, but the homicides were up 10%. Is that correct?
Right, 10.8%.
And that's a pretty startling, concerning increase. Do you agree?
Yes, it is concerning.
Now, I don't know if you have data in 2016, but is your sense that 2016 is going to look closer to 2015, or will it be, is there any indication that the rate's going to go back down?
No, we continue to see spikes in some big cities in a way we can't quite make sense of. There's no doubt that some 15 to 30 cities are continuing to experience a spike. Whether that'll drive the whole number up, I don't know.
Now, the FBI has now assumed control of the Dahir Adan, the Minnesota stabbing terrorist investigation. Is that confirmed that that was a terrorist attack at this point?
We're still working on it. It does look like, at least in part, he was motivated by some sort of inspiration from radical Islamic groups. Which groups and how, we're not sure of yet.
But he was praising Allah, was asking at least one of the potential victims whether they were Muslim, and I know ISIS did take responsibility for it, correct?
They claim responsibility. That isn't dispositive for us, because they'll claim responsibility for any savagery they can get their name on. But we're going through his entire electronic record and history of all of his associations to try and understand that.
Now, there was a report from the House Homeland Security last year that said that Minnesota was actually the #1 source for ISIS fighters in the United States. One, do you acknowledge that, or do you agree that that's true? And if so, why is Minnesota churning out so many jihadists?
I don't know for sure whether that's true, but it sounds about right. We have very few ISIL fighters from the United States, even over the last 2 years. There have been a number of Somali American heritage young men who've gone to fight with al-Shabaab in Somalia and with ISIL. I suspect the reason is that's one of the few areas in the United States where we have a large concentration susceptible to that recruiting. The great thing about America is everybody's kind of dispersed. That's one of the areas where there's an immigrant Muslim community that seems to be susceptible for some reason. In small measure, again, we're talking about 8 people, I think the number is. But that's my reaction to that.
Well, what's the FBI doing to deal with the problem? You have an insular community that may make this problem more significant. So how is the FBI combating that?
Oh, in a bunch of different ways, with lots of partners, to make sure we know the folks especially the Somali American community in Minneapolis. The U.S. Attorney there has done a great job.
Have they been helpful with the FBI?
Very, because they don't want their sons or daughters involved in this craziness any more than anybody else does.
Now, with Paul Combet, I'm just trying to figure out what happened here. He never said that he remembered anything from that March 25th phone conversation with the Clinton people. Of course, that was days before he bleach-bitted the emails. He never said he had any factual knowledge of anything that happened on that call. Is that his basic statement? So I read the 302s. He didn't really provide any information.
I can't remember for sure it being the 302. You've probably seen it more recently than I
I
have.
saw one 302 said that he pled the Fifth. Obviously, he was given immunity. Another said that there was an invocation of attorney-client privilege at one time in one of the other summaries. So I'm just trying to figure out, what happened with Combeto. Why was he not able to provide information? He had immunity. This was something that was much more fresh in his mind than previous conversations with Clinton people would have been. And yet you said he was credible. To me, feigning ignorance, that is not credible given the timeline where you have the New York Times saying that this server existed. The House immediately sends a subpoena. He has this conversation, and then lo and behold, a few days later, all the emails are bleach-bitted.
He told us that with immunity, that no one directed him to do it, instructed him to do it. We developed no evidence to contradict that. Again, we're never in the business of believing people. The question is always, what evidence do we have that establishes disbelief? We don't have any contrary evidence. His account is uncontradicted by hard facts.
Well, he's in a situation where he has, these things are now under a subpoena, and he has conversations with people who they potentially could implicate, and then he takes this action. So I guess the question is it more reasonable to think that he just would have said, oh, you know what, I just need to all of a sudden bleach-bit this stuff without any direction at all? I just find that to be something that is difficult to square. Let me ask you this. In September, you sent a memo to your employees at the FBI basically defending the way the Bureau handled this investigation. Why did you send that?
It was about how we were doing transparency, because there was all kinds of business about whether we were trying to hide stuff by putting it out on a Friday, and I wanted to equip our workforce with transparency about how we were doing our productions to Congress so they can answer questions from their family and friends. I want them to know we're conducting ourselves the way they would want us to.
And because you mentioned former agents and people in the community, I mean, this has provoked some controversy within the ranks of current and former agents?
Not within the FBI. Again, who knows what people don't tell the director, but I should have asked Mr. Gohmert. If there are agents of the FBI who are concerned or confused about this, please contact me. We'll get you the transparency you need to see that your brothers and sisters did this the way you would want them to.
All right, I'm out of time, but I will say just when I was in the military, you had said no one would be prosecuted. I mean, maybe that was just for civilian, but I can tell you that people, if you had compromised top secret information, there would have been a court-martial in your future, and I yield back.
Would the director care to respond to that?
No, fine.
It's a direct comparison to the finding of yourself that as you stated in your news conference, that no prosecutor would prosecute somebody under similar circumstances.
I understood Mr. DeSantis to be expressing a personal opinion. I accept that at face value. I just haven't seen the cases that show me on the public record that that's true. But I accept his good faith.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, did you make the decision not to recommend criminal charges relating to classified information before or after Hillary Clinton was interviewed by the FBI on July the 2nd?
After.
Okay, then I'm going to need your help in trying to understand how that's possible. I think there's a lot of prosecutors or former prosecutors that are shaking our heads in how that could be the case, because if there was ever any real possibility that Hillary Clinton might be charged for something that she admitted to on July the 2nd, why would two of the central witnesses in a potential prosecution against her be allowed to sit in the same room to hear the testimony? Now, I've heard your earlier answers today. You said that, well, it was because the interview was voluntary and they were her lawyers. But I think you're skirting the real issue there, Director. First of all, the fact that it was voluntary, it didn't have to be, right? You could have impaneled an investigative grand jury. She could have been subpoenaed. And I know you've said that you can't comment on that, and I don't really care about the decision about whether or not there should have been a grand jury here. But since you didn't have one, it goes to the issue at hand about whether or not this interview should have ever taken place. With due respect to the answers that you've given, the FBI and the Department of Justice absolutely control whether or not an interview is going to take place with other witnesses in the room, because the simple truth is, if, under the circumstances as you've described, those interviews never take place. If there was ever any possibility that something Hillary Clinton might have said on July 2nd could have possibly resulted in criminal charges that might possibly resulted in a trial against her relating to this classified information, well then, to use your words, Director, I don't think that there's any reasonable prosecutor out there who would have allowed two immunized witnesses central to the prosecution to proving the case against her to sit in the room with the interview, the FBI interview of the subject of that investigation. And if I heard you earlier today, in your long career, I heard you say that you've never had that circumstance. Did I hear you correctly?
That's correct. But
okay, and I never have either, and I've never met a prosecutor that's ever had that. So, to me, the only way that an interview takes place with the two central witnesses and the subject of the investigation is if the decision has already been made that all three people in that room are not going to be charged.
Okay, can I respond?
Yes, please.
I know in our political life sometimes people casually accuse each other of being dishonest, but if colleagues of ours believe I am lying about when I made this decision, please urge them to contact me privately so we can have a conversation about this. All I can do is tell you again, the decision was made after that because I didn't know what was going to happen in that interview. She maybe lied during the interview in a way we could prove. Let me finish. I would also urge you to tell me what tools we have as prosecutors and investigators to kick out of an interview someone that the subject says is their lawyer.
That's not my point. The interview never should have taken place if you were going to allow the central witnesses that you needed to prove the case to sit there and listen to the testimony that the subject was going to give. It never happens. It never happened to you, and it's never happened to me or any other prosecutor that I've met. And I know you've defended the people that were involved in this as being great, but if it's never happened, I wonder why this is a case of first precedent with respect to that practice that you and I have never seen in our careers.
You and I don't control the universe of what's happened. I suspect it's very unusual. A key fact, though, that maybe is leading to some confusion here is we had already concluded we didn't have a prosecutable case against Heather Samuelson or Cheryl Mills at that point. If they were targets of our investigation, maybe we would have canceled the interview. But frankly, our focus was on the subject. The subject at that point was Hillary Clinton.
All right, let me move on. According to the FBI's own documents, Paul Gambetta was, in his first interview on February the 18th, told FBI agents that he had no knowledge about the preservation order for the Clinton emails, correct?
I don't know the dates of that, but I'm sure it's in the 302.
Okay, but then 2.5 months later, on May the 3rd, his second interview, he made a 180-degree turn. And he admitted that, in fact, he was aware of the preservation order, and he was aware of the fact that that meant that he shouldn't disturb the Clinton emails, correct?
Yep.
Okay, well then I need your help again here, because when I was at the Department of Justice, your reward for lying to federal agents was an 18 U.S.C. 1001 charge or potential obstruction of justice charge. It wasn't immunity.
Depends on where you're trying to go with the investigation. It's a low-level guy and you're trying to move up in the chain, you might think about it differently.
Well, he lied to an FBI agent. You don't think that's important?
Oh, it's very important. Happens all the time. Unfortunately, it's very, very important. Sometimes you prosecute that person and end their cooperation. Sometimes you try and sign them up.
But if they lie to an FBI agent after they're given immunity, they violated the terms of their immunity agreement.
Oh, sure, after the agreement.
And so that's my point. He shouldn't have immunity anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood you. He lied to us before he came clean under the immunity agreement and admitted that he had deleted the emails.
No, not according to the FBI's documents. He had the immunity agreement in December of 2015. These interviews took place in February and March and May of this year, 2016.
Gambetta?
Gambetta.
Okay, then I'm confused and misremembering, but I don't think that's right.
Okay, well, my time's expired, but I have one last question, and I think that's important. At this point, based on everything, do you think that any laws were broken by Hillary Clinton or her lawyers?
Do I think that any laws were broken? Yeah. I don't think there's evidence to establish that.
Okay. Well, I think you're making my point when you say there's no evidence to establish that. Maybe not in the way she handled classified information, but with respect to obstruction of justice. And you've got a pen here. I just want to make sure the record's clear about the evidence that you didn't have, that you can't use to prove. So this comes from the FBI's own report. It says that the FBI didn't have the Clintons' personal Apple server used for Hillary Clinton work emails That was never located, so the FBI could never examine it. An Apple MacBook laptop and thumb drive that contained Hillary Clinton's email archives was lost, so the FBI never examined that. 2 BlackBerry devices, provided the FBI didn't have SIM cards or SD data cards. 13 Hillary Clinton personal mobile devices were lost, discarded, or destroyed with a hammer, so the FBI clearly didn't examine those. Various server backups were deleted over time, so the FBI didn't examine that. After the State Department and my colleague, Mr. Gowdy, here notified Ms. Clinton that her records would be sought by the Benghazi Committee, copies of her emails on the laptops of both of her lawyers, Cheryl Mills and Harold Mills, and Heather Samuelson, were wiped clean with bleach bits, so the FBI didn't review that. After those emails were subpoenaed, Hillary Clinton's email archive was also permanently deleted from the Platte River Network with bleach bit, so the FBI didn't review that. And also after the subpoena, backups of the Platte River server were manually deleted. Now, Director, hopefully that list is substantially accurate because it comes from your own documents. My question to you is this: any one of those in that very, very long list, to me, says obstruction of justice. Collectively, they scream obstruction of justice, and to ignore them, I think, really allows not just reasonable prosecutors, but reasonable people to believe that maybe the decision on this was made a long time ago not to prosecute Hillary Clinton. And with that, I yield back.
Director, do you care to respond?
Very briefly, to ignore that which we don't have, we're in a fact-based world, so we make evaluations based on the evidence we're able to gather using the tools that we have. So it's hard for me to react to these things that you don't have. So that's my reaction to it.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Director Comey, thank you for being here. I know this is, there are a lot of things you would probably much rather be doing than sitting on the hot seat, so to speak. And here's where I'm coming from on this. You've been asked a lot of questions today about the Clinton investigation. And what I'm hearing from folks back in Texas, and I'm just going to take a big picture view of this, is this stuff just simply doesn't pass the smell test on a lot of areas. You just had my colleague from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe, list a long list of things that y'all didn't have in the investigation. You've been asked earlier today, well, would you reopen the investigation? What would it take to get you to reopen the investigation? We've had 5 people given immunity, which basically we got nothing when, perhaps a plea agreement or something else might have worked. You have your interpretation in your previous testimony before Congress that Section 793F required intent when, in fact, the standard is gross negligence. And it is just a long list of things that just have people scratching their heads going, if this were to happen to me, I would be in a world of hurt, probably in jail. And how do you respond to people who are saying that this is not how an average American would be treated, this is only how Hillary Clinton would be treated?
Yeah, look, I've heard that a lot, and my response is, demand, when people tell you that others have been treated differently, demand from a trustworthy source the details of those cases. Because I'm a very aggressive investigator, I was a very aggressive prosecutor. I have gone back through 40 years of cases, and I'm telling you, under oath, that to prosecute on these facts would be a double standard, because Jane and Joe Smith would not be prosecuted on these facts. Now, you'd be in trouble. That's the other thing I've had to explain to the FBI workforce. You use an unclassified email system to do our business. And in the course of doing our business, talk about classified topics, you will be in big trouble at the FBI. I'm highly confident of that. I'm also highly confident, in fact certain, you would not be prosecuted. That's what folks tend to lump together. So I care deeply about what people think about the justice system, and that it not have 2 standards. It does not, and this demonstrates
But you look at General Petraeus in his handling of classified information. You look at, and I'll go back to what you're saying.
But when you look at it, demand to know the facts. I don't want to dump on General Petraeus, because the case is over, but I would be happy to go through how very different that circumstance is than this circumstance.
And you talk about, you tell your FBI agents, if you do what we're investigating here with material from the FBI, you'd be a world of trouble. I would assume that could potentially be fired. is Hillary Clinton, she didn't get in any trouble at the State Department. The only trouble she's got now is trying to explain it to the American people.
Right, she's not a government employee, so the normal range of discipline that would be applied to FBI employees if they did something similar doesn't apply. And I think that's some of the reason for people's confusion, lumping these two together, and their frustration, but it is what it is. And all I can tell people is demand the facts. When people tell you, oh, so-and-so has been treated differently, demand the facts on that.
All right, so if somebody were to, let's just do a hypothetical. Let's say somebody here in Congress were to email my personal email some classified information, and I get my phone, it comes to my cell phone too, my personal email comes to my personal cell phone. I look at it and go, wow, that probably shouldn't be on there, and don't do anything. I mean, to me, that's being grossly negligent with classified information, and that's a violation of 793F. And that's exactly what Hillary Clinton did, I think. I mean, at what point do you get to intent? The classified information was on an unsecure server, you knew it was there, and you didn't do anything about it. To me, that's gross negligence, period. I would think I would be prosecuted for that.
Yeah, I'm confident that you wouldn't, but we just have to agree to disagree.
All right, if I ever get in trouble,
don't do it. Don't do it. Well, I guess I can't control Congress. If you work for us, don't do it.
No, I have absolutely no intention of doing it. So again, I just want to say, don't get frustrated when we continue to ask these questions, because we're not badgering you because we want to badger you. We are talking to you because the American people are upset about this and don't think it was handled appropriately. And that's the basis, at least, of my questioning. And I thank you for appearing here.
And I totally understand that. That I think there are lots of questions people have, which is why I've worked so hard to try and be transparent. There's never been this kind of transparency in a criminal case, ever. But because I understand the questions and the importance of it, I've tried. But I hope people will separate two things: questions about facts and judgment from questions and accusations about integrity. As I said before, you can call us wrong, you can call me a fool, you cannot call us weasels, okay? That is just not fair, and I hope we haven't gotten to a place in American public life where everything has to be torn down on an integrity basis just to disagree. You can disagree with this. There is just not a fair basis for saying that we did it in any way that wasn't honest and independent. That's when I get a little worked up, sorry.
I'm out of time.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Comey. I appreciate your testimony here today. Just in follow-up to all this discussion regarding the Clinton investigation, specifically with regard to the interview of Secretary Clinton, I'm holding in my hand a memorandum from Deputy Attorney General James Cole. It's dated May 12, 2014. This memorandum was issued to you and others on the policy concerning electronic recording of statements. Are you familiar with this memorandum?
Mm-hmm.
The policy establishes a presumption that the FBI will electronically record statements made by individuals in their custody. Now, I know that Secretary Clinton was not technically in custody, but the policy also encourages agents and prosecutors to consider electronic recording in investigative or other circumstances where that presumption does not exist. The policy also encourages agents and prosecutors to consult with each other in such circumstances. And given the magnitude of what we've been talking about today and the huge public interest and demand for information with regard to the public trust, I think this is specifically important to this discussion. Now, you're aware of this policy, correct?
Right, that applies to people that are in handcuffs.
But not, it also applies to, the policy also encourages agents and prosecutors to consider electronic recording in investigative matter and other matters where that presumption does not exist. Does it not?
The FBI doesn't do it, but sure, I understand that they encouraged us to talk about it.
So did the agents then did not consider to conduct the interview in a recorded situation then?
We do not record non-custodial interviews. Okay. Now, maybe someday folks will urge us to change that policy, but we don't, and we sure wouldn't want to change it in one particular case.
Well, that's the policy. I'm just reading the policy that's issued by the Deputy Attorney General, James Cole, that is to you and to others in the Department of Justice that establishes the policy. So if you don't do it, I assume that you're doing it against the policy of the Department of Justice.
No, that policy only governs custodial interrogation, so people who've been locked up. We do not, and it is not inconsistent with Department of Justice policy, record non-custodial. So that is voluntary interviews where someone's not in our custody.
Well, I'm reading this differently then, because it does say that there is an exception, that it is within your discretion to record such.
Well, sure, you could, and I don't know, maybe some other federal investigative agencies do. The FBI's practice is we do not record non-custodial interviews.
Okay, thank you, Director. I want to pivot, if I can, and build off Representative DeSantis's questions with regard to the refugees attempting to enter the United States, and specifically with regard to Syrian refugees. Wondering if you can tell me, we've talked about this process and the fact that we do not have a process in place that we can rely upon. You've indicated before when you testified, and I asked the question, that we just simply don't have enough information to ensure that we have the information that we need to ensure that these people are not a threat to our country. Can you expand upon that now after a year? Can you tell me whether or not we've got more information, more capabilities to vet these refugees? And I say this because in my district in Michigan, in this fiscal year, Michigan has taken the fourth most refugees of all states, 4,178, and we've taken the third most for Iraq, the second most from Syria. Michigan has absorbed an enormous number of refugees, and I think you can understand our concern with regard to the fact that we don't have information necessary to identify whether or not they're a threat. Can you assuage my concern, the concerns of my constituents, that we have a system in place that we can vet these individuals and they don't pose a threat to our country?
I can assuage in part and restate my concern in part. Our process inside the United States government has gotten much better at making sure we touch all possible sources of information about a refugee. The interview process has gotten more robust, so we've gotten our act together in that respect. The challenge remains, especially with respect to folks coming from Syria. We're unlikely to have anything in our holdings. That is, with people coming from Iraq, the United States government was there for a very long period of time. We had biometrics, we had source information. We're unlikely to have that kind of picture about someone coming from Syria, and that's the piece I just wanted folks to be aware of.
Has anything changed in your vetting process? Have you updated it? Do you have any concerns with regard? We've seen an increased terrorist activity in the last 6 months, including New York, New Jersey, and Minneapolis. Has anything changed in the vetting process? Can you be confident that foreign fighters or other refugees entering the country are not planning future attacks on our country?
Well, as I said, over the last year, since I was last before you, the vetting process has gotten more effective in the ways I described. I'm in a business where I can't ever say that there's no risk associated with someone, so we wake up every day in the FBI worrying about who might have gotten through in any form or fashion to the United States or who might be getting inspired while they're here, so I can't ever give a blanket assurance.
Director, I respect your opinion. And this is not a policy question. I'm asking you based on your personal opinion as a law enforcement officer that we rely upon to keep this country safe. Is there anything that you would do to ensure, as you said, that our country is safe with regard to this refugee process?
Anything that I would do?
Anything that you do. Any recommendations you have for Congress, for this country, that would ensure our safety?
Yeah, I shy away from assurances of safety given the nature of the threats we face. I do think that there may be opportunities to do more in the social media space with refugees in particular, and I talked to Jay Johnson yesterday about it. I know there's a work in progress. So much of people's lives, even if we don't have it in our holdings, may be in digital dust that they've left in different places. Are we harvesting that dust on people who want to come into this country in the best way? And I think there may be ground for improvement there.
Thank you, Director. And I will yield back. But, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter the memorandum that I referenced earlier from dated May 12, 2014, into the record.
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Comey, I appreciate you being here. You are, I believe, forthright, much more so than you said is in any criminal case we've had. But I'm also still in the military. I'm still in the Air Force Reserve. I went to my drill back in July. I was hit by an amazing amount of questions from different service members on this issue of how does the former Secretary of State get to do this, and yet we have members of the military who are prosecuted all the time. Your statements earlier were fairly startling when you said, I don't know of anybody else that's been classified as this. Just since 2009, the Department of Justice has prosecuted at least 7 people under the Espionage Act, all for very similar cases. Now, you said go look at the facts. Well, we're looking at the facts in these cases. The interesting one, and you know, you said that in looking back at your investigation, mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All right. Well, it didn't take nothing but a simple legal search to find a Marine that fallen. Now, I guess their name is not Jane or Joe, so they did get prosecuted. Okay, and this is the issue under 18 U.S.C. 793F, gross negligence. This is what the Marine did. They took classified information that was put into a gym bag, cleaned out, washed, and took. All right, simple mishandling. Court of Appeals actually upheld this case, and this is what they said, that the purpose of federal espionage statutes is to protect classified documents from unauthorized procedures, such as removal from proper place of custody, which would mean how you deal with this. Regardless of means of removal, it was apparent gross negligence and was approximate cause of the document's removal. It is, and they quoted United States v. McGinnis, said, it is clear the Congress's intent to create a hierarchy of offenses against national security ranging from classic spying to merely losing classified materials through gross negligence or the mishandling of. It was sort of also ironic for me that when I had to go back in July in this past month when I went back, I had to do my annual information assurance training that went through everything that we have to do with handling classified information. I have been in a war zone. I've been in this is just common knowledge among most everybody in the world, obviously not to the Secretary. How can you then explain to me this Marine's mistake in taking classified documents or mishandling them is more severe than the Secretary of State who sent and received classified emails on a regular basis, including those that were originally classified, not those that were classified later, but were originally classified?
Yeah, first of all, I'm familiar with the case, and I'm quite certain it's not a 793F case. It was prosecuted
His conviction was under 793F.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I'll go back and check again. I'd urge you to, too. I'm pretty sure it's not under the gross negligence prong of 793F. But it's a Uniform Court of Military Justice prosecution, not by the Department of Justice, am I remembering correctly?
This was from and is appealed out in the U.S. the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces did actually hold it on this. Yes.
But regardless, I think even, I don't think this is under the same provision, but even there, that's a case involving someone who actually stole classified information, hard copies. What people need to remember, and I don't say this to make a little of it, I think it's a very serious matter. What happened here is the Secretary used an unclassified email system, her personal system, to conduct her business.
And let's just stop right there. That in and of itself, and I understand it's Dr. Comey, we've been through, you've been through a lot of questions, I apologize. But let's just come back to the basics here. We're trying to parse that I didn't have such a Sandy Berger or all these others who've been prosecuted, they took a hard copy. In today's society, and even understanding if you go through any information assurance class, anything else, they tell you it cannot be on a personal laptop. In fact, there was another chief petty officer who had classified information on a personal computer. It went back and forth at war zone. That is not physical documents. It's on a, to parse words like that is why the American people are fed up. They're fed up with the IRS commissioner when he does it. They're fed up here. I'm not attacking your, I think you're one of the more upright people I've met. I think you just blew it. I think the Attorney General blew it. I shared this with her. And I think when we come to this saying there's no other way that you can say that there's no others that resemble this, as a lawyer, you're taught all the time to take facts and put them, they may not be exact, but they fit under the law. You can't, I mean, so I guess maybe I'm going to change the question because we're going to go down to a dead end. You're going to say it wasn't. But let me ask you this. I want to change questions. Do you honestly believe that a lady, a woman of vast intelligence, who is the First Lady of the United States, who is a senator who had access to classified information, all the members here do, who was Secretary of State who had even further classification ability even beyond what we have here. Do you believe that in this case, honestly, she was not grossly negligent or criminal in her acts?
First of all, I don't believe anyone other than my wife. My question is, what evidence do I have to establish that state of mind? And I don't believe I have evidence to establish it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Then really what we're saying here is this. And this is in essence what you're saying. You said, I can't prove it, and I understand. There's a lot of folks out there in the law that, they come to us all the time. I'm an attorney as well, and they come to and say, it's not what we know, it's not what we think, it's what we can prove. I get it. But here's the problem with this, and this is the person who's asking to lead this country. If she can hide behind this and gleefully get approval from the FBI through an investigation, which has been covered here thoroughly, then I just do not understand. She is either the most arrogant, which probably so, or the most insanely naive person we've ever met. Because when I actually show evidences of basically the same thing, which you can take facts and correlate to law, this is why the armed forces right now have the new term called the Clinton defense. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. It's on my brain. It's the Clinton defense. With questions like this, Director, we have given the ability now to where nobody takes this seriously. And this is why people are upset. When it was originally classified, she can tell all the stories she wants. She can have the backup from you that no prosecutor, which is, again, amazing to me, that a law enforcement would tell the prosecutor. Because how many times I've been on both sides of this, where the law enforcement agent said, I'm not sure we have a case here, but when the prosecutor looks at it, the prosecutor says, yeah, there's a case here. I don't really, frankly, no offense, care what, if I'm prosecuting, what the law enforcement officer, if I can see the case and I can make it, that's my job, not yours. And yet now we have a whole system that has been turned upside down, not because I don't believe your honesty of your people, but I believe you blew it because you, frankly, didn't have the whole situation into effect where the FBI would look political. And unfortunately, that's all you've become in this. And it's a sad thing because y'all do great work. You have do great work, and you will do great work. But I think it's time to start, we just bring down the curtain. There's a wizard behind the thing, this Hillary Clinton, who is playing all of us because she's not that naive. She's not stupid. She knew what she was doing because she was simply too bored. If she, God forbid, gets into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and just gets bored with the process, then God help us all. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, there's only two.
The Director is permitted to respond.
Yeah. Two pieces of that I need to respond to. First, you said hiding behind something. This case was investigated by a group of professionals. So if I blew it, they blew it too. Career FBI agents, the very best we have were put on this case, and career analysts. We are a team. No one hid behind anything. American citizens should insist that we bring criminal charges if we're able to investigate and produce evidence beyond reasonable doubt to charge somebody. That should be true whether you're investigating me or you or Joe Smith on the street. That's the way this case was done. It's about evidence. And the rest of it I'll let go.
Mr. Chairman, I will, and I apologize if you're not saying, just to comment. I'm not, this is the problem though. When you take it as a whole, it's been set up here, this is a unique case. You've talked about it being a unique case. Director, this is a unique case because I truly, and I don't think you convinced hardly anybody except your own group, I don't think you ever said they couldn't blow it. They blew it. Anybody else would have been prosecuted under this. In my humble opinion,
You're just wrong.
you say
You're just
no.
wrong. We'll just have to agree to disagree.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot to disagree on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, I've always appreciated your testimony before this committee, and I respect the work that you do for the FBI. When you made your recommendations to the Department of Justice to not prosecute Hillary Clinton, I actually disagreed with your decision, but I appreciated your candor in explaining to the American people and to us those recommendations. Since that decision, I continue to view you as honorable and a strong leader for the critical federal agency. In fact, I did 20 town hall meetings over the recess, and I was lambasted at every one of them. In fact, I think I lost votes because I defended your integrity at every one of those town hall meetings. And I told them why, even though I disagreed with your conclusions, I thought you came to it from an honorable place. However, as more information has come to light, I question the thoroughness, and I'm not questioning your integrity, but the thoroughness and the scope of the FBI's investigation. In the past week, we have learned of the grants of immunity to several key witnesses in the Clinton investigation, including Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff and one of the individuals responsible for setting up her server. I'm really disappointed by this revelation and confused as to why these immunity grants were necessary and appropriate given the circumstances. It appears to me that the FBI was very early in this investigation too willing to strike deals and ensure that top officials could never be prosecuted for their role in what we now know was a massive breach of national security protocol. We have a duty to ensure that our FBI is still in the business of investigating criminal activity. So at what point in the investigation was Cheryl Mills offered immunity?
Cheryl Mills was never offered immunity, not to quibble, but she was given letter immunity to govern.
At what point?
June of 2016, so June of this year, so about 11 months into the investigation.
So, and to be clear, was she offered immunity for interview and potential testimony or for turning over the laptop as evidence?
Turning over the laptop as evidence, it governed what could be done in terms of using it against her, that laptop.
To your knowledge, was Cheryl Mills an uncooperative witness prior to the immunity deal?
I think our assessment was she was cooperative. I forget the month she was interviewed, but she was interviewed fully before that.
And she always cooperated?
I think our assessment was, again, this is the odd way I look at the world, we had no reason to believe she was being uncooperative.
So could this investigation have been completed without these grants of immunity in place?
In my view, it couldn't be concluded professionally without doing our best to figure out what was on those laptops. So getting the laptops was very important to me and to the investigative team.
So in your vast experience as an investigator, as a DOJ attorney, now as an FBI director, how many times have you allowed a person who is a material witness to a crime you're investigating to act as the lawyer in that same investigation?
Well, to let is what I'm stumbling on. The FBI has no power to stop someone in a voluntary interview.
You're speaking, let's just be honest. The FBI allowed Cheryl Mills to act as the attorney in a case that she was a material witness. How many times have you done that?
In the same sense that I'm allowing you to question me.
How many times have you done that?
I can't stop you from questioning me.
How many times have you done that prior?
I have not had an experience where the subject of the interview was represented by a lawyer who was also a witness in the investigation.
Okay, so you have never had that experience?
Not in my experience.
You prosecuted terrorists and mobsters, right?
Correct.
And during your time in justice, how many times did you allow a lawyer who was a material witness to the case that you were prosecuting to also act as the subject of, as the attorney to the subject of that investigation?
Yeah, as I said, I don't think I've encountered this situation where a witness, a lawyer for the subject of the investigation was also a witness of the investigation.
So this was highly unusual to have?
In my experience, yes.
Okay. In your answer to Chairman Chaffetz, you indicated that you had no reason to disbelieve Paul Gambetta when he told you that he erased a hard drive on his own. Is that correct?
Correct.
However, in the exchange on Reddit, he said, I need to strip out a VIP's email address from a bunch of archived email. Basically, they don't want the VIP's email address exposed to anyone. Those two statements are not consistent. How can you say that he was truthful when he told you nobody told him to act this way, but yet you saw this Reddit account that says where they told him that he needed to act in this way?
I think the assessment of the investigative team is those are about two different subjects. One is a year before, in the summer of 2014, about how to produce emails and whether there's a way to remove or mask the actual email address, the HRC, whatever it is, .com. And the other is about actually deleting the content of those emails sitting on the server.
It seems like in your investigation you found time after time evidence of destruction, evidence of breaking iPhones and other phones, all these different things, but yet you find that there's no evidence of intent. And I'm a little bit confused as to your interpretation of 18 U.S.C. 793F. On the one hand, you've said that Secretary Clinton couldn't be charged because her conduct was extremely careless, but not grossly negligent, correct?
That's not exactly what I said.
That's what you said today. But you've also said there was no evidence of her intent to harm the United States. So, but you'll agree that a person can act with gross negligence or even act knowingly without possessing some additional specific intent. So which is it? Is it a lack of gross negligence that she had or a lack of intent?
In terms of my overall judgment about whether the case was worthy of prosecution, it's the lack of evidence to meet what I understand to be the elements of the crime, one, and two, a consideration of what would be fair with respect to how other people have been treated. Those two things together tell me, and nothing has happened that's changed my view on this, that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. The specific intent question, yes, I agree that specific intent to harm the United States is a different thing than a gross negligence or a willfulness.
So just one last question. You talked about Mary and Joe. And Mary and Joe would be disciplined at the FBI if they did what Hillary Clinton did. If Mary and Joe came to you and asked for a promotion immediately after being disciplined, would you give them that promotion?
Tough to answer that hypothetical. It would depend upon the nature of the conduct and what discipline had been imposed.
And what if they ever asked for a promotion that would give them management and control of cybersecurity of your agency and the secrets of your agency after they had done these things? Would you give them that promotion?
That's a question I don't want to answer.
All right.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Walters, for 5 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Director Comey. Despite the absence of an intent mens rea standard in 18 U.S.C. Section 793F, you have said that there has never been a prosecution without evidence of intent. Thus, the standard has been read into the statute despite the specific language enacted. What exactly are the legal precedents that justify reading intent into the statute?
Well, my understanding of 793F is governed by a couple things, three things really. One, the legislative history from 1917, which I've read, and the one case that was prosecuted in the case. And those two things combined tell me that when Congress enacted 793F, they were very worried about the gross negligence language and actually put in legislative history, we understand it to be something very close to willfulness. Then the next 100 years of treatment of that actually tell me that the Department of Justice for a century has had that same reservation because they've only used it once. And that was in a case involving an FBI agent who was in an espionage context. So those things together inform my judgment of it.
Considering the importance of protecting classified information for national security purposes, a lot of people disagree that an intent standard should be read into that statute. What specific language would you recommend we enact to ensure gross negligence is the actual standard for the statute, not intent?
I don't think that's something the Bureau ought to give advice on. It's a good question as to what the standard should be. I could imagine federal employees being very concerned about how you draw the line for criminal liability, but I don't think that's something we ought to advise on, the legislation.
Okay. Should we enact a mens rea standard for extreme carelessness for the statute?
Same answer, I think, is appropriate.
Should we enact a civil fine?
A civil fine for mishandling classified information? I don't know, actually, because it's already subject to discipline, which is suspension or loss of clearance or loss of job, which is a big monetary impact to the people disciplined. So I don't know whether it's necessary.
Okay, I want to change subjects for my next question. As you know, the number of criminal background checks for non-criminal purposes, such as for employment decisions, continues to increase annually. I don't expect that you have this information on hand. However, would you be willing to provide the committee and my staff with the number of criminal history record checks for fingerprint-based background checks that the FBI has conducted over each of the past 5 years? And what are your thoughts regarding whether the FBI has the capacity to process the increasing number of background check requests?
I'm sure we can get you that number because I'm sure we track it, so I'll make sure my staff follows up with you. I do believe we have the resources. Where we've been strained is on the background checks for firearms purchases. The other background check processes we run, my overall sense is we have enough troops to do that. We charge a fee for those, and I think we're able to generate the resources we need.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Okay.
Could the gentlelady yield to me?
Sure. I'd be happy to yield to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Director, some time ago you appeared before this committee and you told us that you had exhausted all of the capability to unlock the San Bernardino iPhone, the 5C. Did that turn out to be true?
Still true.
That you had exhausted all of your capability?
At the FBI had, yes.
So shouldn't we be concerned from a cyber standpoint that you couldn't unlock a phone, that in fact an Israeli company came forward and unlocked for you, and basically a Cambridge professor or student for $90 is shown also to be able to unlock and mirror or duplicate the memory? And this is purely a question of you apparently do not have the resources to do that which others can do. Isn't that correct?
I'm sure that's true in a whole bunch of respects, but first I got to correct you. I'm not confirming. You said an Israeli company. I'm not.
Well, okay. A contractor for you reported to be for $1 million unlocked the phone. So I would ask you to confirm the phone got unlocked, right?
Yes, it did.
Okay. So the technology could be created outside of ordering a company to essentially clandestine or re-engineer their software for you, correct?
Yeah, in this particular case, yes.
Okay, and so you lack that capability. How can this committee know that you're in the process of developing that sort of technology, the equivalent of the Cambridge $90 technology?
How can the committee know?
Yeah. I mean, in other words, where are the assurances that you're going to get robust enough? We have an encryption working group that was formed between multiple committees to no small extent because of your action of going to a magistrate and getting an order because you lack that capability, and we're trying a new technique of ordering a company to go invent for you. The question is, how do we know that won't happen again, that you will go to the court, ask for something when in fact the technology exists or could exist to do it in some other way, a technology that you should have at your disposal, or at least some Federal agency should, like the NSA?
Well, first of all, it could well happen again, which is why I think it's great that people are talking about what we might do about this problem. It's an interesting question as to whether we ought to invest in us having the ability to hack into people's devices. Whether that's the best solution doesn't strike me as the best solution, but we are, and I've asked for more money in the 17 budget, trying to invest in building those capabilities so when we really need to be able to get into a device, we can. It's not scalable, and I'm not sure it would be thrilling to companies like Apple to know we're investing money to try and figure out how to hack into their stuff.
Well, isn't it, and I'll be brief, isn't it true that we have clandestine organizations who have the mandate to do just that, to look around the world and to be able to find information that people don't know you can find, keep it secret, get it out there? And my question to you is, shouldn't we, instead of giving you the money, simply continue to leverage other agencies who already have that mandate and then ask you to ask them to be your conduit for that when you have an appropriate need?
And that's a reasonable question. It may be part of the solution. Real challenges in using those kinds of techniques in the bulk of our work because it becomes public and exposed. But that has to be an important part of the conversation.
Thank you. Yield back.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Director Comey. Director Comey, the last thing I want to do is to lecture you on anything related to the law, because I think you've given your whole life to that effort. And I guess in the face of so many things already having been said here and asked, that all I can do is to try to sort of associate this in a reference of why there is a rule of law. You know, we had that little unpleasantness in the late 1770s with England over this rule of law, because we realized there's really only two main ways to govern, and that is by the rule of men or the rule of law. And sometimes it's important for all of us just to kind of reconnect what this whole enterprise of America is all about. And I, again, don't seek to lecture you in that regard. And I know, and you have to forgive me for being a Republican partisan here, because I am very biased in this case. But I know that when you interviewed Mrs. Clinton, you were up against someone that really should have an earned doctorate of duplicity and deception hanging on her wall. I don't know that you probably could have interviewed a more gifted prevaricator. So I know you were up against the best. But having said that, when I read the law here that I know so many have already referenced, I think maybe that's the best way for me to do that. 18 U.S.C. 1924 provides that any federal official who, quote, becomes possessed of documents or materials containing classified information of the United States and knowingly removes such documents or materials without authority and with the intent to retain such documents or materials at an unauthorized location shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 1 year or both. Now, I didn't miss one word there. It does not require, that section does not require an intent to profit. It doesn't require harm to the United States or otherwise to act in any manner disloyal to the United States. It only requires intent to retain classified documents at an unauthorized location. And I believe, sir, in all sincerity to you, person to person, I believe that some of your comments reflected that that's what occurred. Over the last several months, I believe that's the case. And so I have to, it's my job to ask you again, why the simple clarity of that law was not applied in this case. Because the implications here are so profound for your children and mine, for this country. They are so profound. And again, I don't envy your job, but I want to give you the remainder of the time to help me understand why a law like this that any law school graduate, if we can't apply this one in this case, how in God's name can we apply it in any case in the world? Why is it even written? So I'm going to stop there and ask your forbearance and just go for it.
Sure. No, it's a reasonable question. That is the 18 U.S.C. 1924 is the misdemeanor mishandling statute. That is the basis on which most people have been prosecuted for mishandling classified information have been prosecuted. It is not a strict liability statute. I was one of the people when I was in the private sector who argued against strict liability criminal statutes. It requires, in the view of the Department of Justice and over long practice, proof of some criminal intent, not specific intent to harm the United States, but a general awareness that you're doing something that's unlawful. So you have to prove criminal intent. So there's two problems in this case. One is developing the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Secretary Clinton acted with that criminal intent. And second, even if you could do that, which you can't, looking at the history of other cases, what would be the right thing to do here? Has anybody ever been prosecuted on anything near these facts? And again, I keep telling the folks at home, when people tell you lots of people have been prosecuted for this, please demand the details of those cases, because I've been through them all. So that combination of what the statute requires and the history of prosecutions told me, and again, people can take a different view, and it's reasonable to disagree, that no reasonable prosecutor would bring that case. That, in a nutshell, is what it is.
You said it was a reasonable question, it was a reasonable answer, but I can't find that in the statute. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, and I'm going down a completely different path. Our law enforcement in this country have a consistent enemy in a group called sovereign citizens. And what I have seen in my district, we lost 2 officers in St. John Parish about 4 years ago. And we just lost another 3 officers in Baton Rouge with another couple injured. In the case in St. John Parish, we actually had the perpetrators on the radar in North Louisiana. And at some point, they moved to South Louisiana in my district, and we lost contact. So when St. John Parish deputies went to their trailer park, they had no idea what they were walking into, and they walked into an ambush with AR-15s and AK-47s, and the unimaginable happened. So through in-kick and other things, are you all focused on making sure, and I think there are about 100,000 of them, but are you all focused on making sure that our law enforcement has the best information when dealing with whether it's sovereign citizen or terrorist cells or other bad actors, that that information gets to the locals so they're not surprised and ambushed?
Well, we sure are, and I don't know the circumstances of that case, but I will find out the circumstances. In two respects, we want obviously people to know when someone's wanted, but more than that, we have a known or suspected terrorist file that should have information in that about people we are worried about, so that if an officer is making a stop or going up to execute a search warrant and they run that address of that person, they'll get a hit on what we call the KST file. So that's our objective. And if there are ways to make it better, we want to.
Now let's switch lanes a little bit, because this is one of, I think, an issue when we start talking about criminal justice reform and we start talking about the FBI. In my community, in communities of color, and with elected officials, there seems to be two standards, one for low-level elected officials and then one for other people. So I guess the facts I will give you in some of our cases, and you tell me if it sounds inconsistent with your knowledge of the law and your protocol, but nonprofit organizations where elected officials have either been on boards or had some affiliation with, when those funds are used in a manner that benefits them personally, they have been prosecuted. And I mean for amounts that range from anywhere from $2,000 upwards to $100,000. Your interpretation of the law that if a nonprofit funds are used to benefit a person and not the organization, that is a theft of funds, because I believe that those are a lot of the charges that I have seen in my community. Would you agree with that?
Sure, it could be, and I know from personal experience, having done these cases, that's at the center of a case involving a corrupt official.
Now, let's take elected official out and just take any foundation director or board director or executive director who would use the funds of a nonprofit to pay personal debts or bills or just takes money. You would agree that that would constitute a violation of the law, criminal statute?
Potentially. On the federal side, potentially of wire fraud, mail fraud, or a tax charge, potentially.
The other thing that I would say is that in our community, we feel that it's selective prosecution, that if you're rich, you have another standard, that if you're an African American, you have another standard. And there are a number of cases that I will give you offline, but it appears that, and my concern is the authority of your agents to decide that a person is bad and then take them through holy hell to try to get to the ultimate conclusion that the agent made, and they don't let the facts get in their way. And at the end of the day, you have business people who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect their reputation and to fight a charge that they ultimately win, but now they are broke, they're defeated, because when it comes out, it says the United States of America versus you. So I would just ask you to create a mindset within the department that they understand the consequences of leaks to the press, charges, and what happens if, when those charges are really not substantiated, you still break a person. And I think that you all have a responsibility to be very careful with the awesome power that you all are given. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. The Director is welcome to respond.
I very much agree with what you said, Congressman, at the end of that. The power to investigate is the power to ruin. Obviously, charging people can also be ruinous, so it's one we have to be extraordinarily prudent in exercising, fair, open-minded, and careful. So I very much agree with that.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Trott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for being here, and thank you for your service to our country. When you made your statement at the press conference on July 5th, you said, "I have not coordinated or reviewed this statement in any way with the Department of Justice or any part of government. They do not know what I'm about to say." I have no reason to question your integrity, but is there any chance that someone working in your office or as part of this investigation knew what you were going to decide and recommend, and maybe told one of the Attorney General's staff what was about to happen on July 5th?
Yeah, look, anything's possible. I think I'd be willing to bet my life that didn't happen, just because I know my folks.
So here's why I ask. The facts give me pause. Investigation started in July of 15. Many of us in Congress, including myself, suggested that the Attorney General should recuse herself because of her friendship with the Clintons and because of her desire to continue on as Attorney General in the Clinton administration. Then she had the fortuitous meeting on the airplane with former President Clinton on June 30th. Then on July 2nd, give or take, she came out and said, "You know, I've created an appearance of impropriety, and so I'm going to just follow whatever the FBI director's recommendation is," and then 3 days later you had your press conference. And in your press conference you said, "In our system of justice, the prosecutors make the decisions about what charges are appropriate based on the evidence." That's not what happened in this case. Ultimately, you made the decision. Isn't that what happened?
Well, look, I made public my recommendation. The decision to decline the case was made at the Justice Department.
But before you had that press conference, you knew, based on the Attorney General's public comments, that she was going to follow whatever you recommended. So ultimately, you made the decision in this case as to whether or not charges should be filed against Secretary Clinton. Isn't that the reality of what happened?
I think that's a fair characterization. The only thing I'd add to that is I think she said, I don't remember exactly, that she would defer to the FBI and the career prosecutors at the Department of Justice. But look, I knew that once I made public the FBI's view that this wasn't a prosecutable case, that there was virtually zero chance that the Department of Justice was going to go in a different direction. But part of my decision was based on my prediction that there was no way the Department of Justice would prosecute on these facts in any event. So I think your characterization is fair, but I just wanted to add that color to it.
But you can see how some of us would look at the dates and the facts leading up to your press conference and think, okay, for a year we've been suggesting she's not the appropriate person to make the ultimate decision as to whether charges should be filed. She won't recuse herself, and then 3 days before you come out with your recommendation, which she's already said she's going to follow, she basically decides to recuse herself. Those facts give me pause.
Yeah, I get why folks would ask about that, but I actually think there are two dates that matter. I think, but what generated that was the controversy around her meeting with President Clinton, not the interview with Secretary Clinton.
That's a whole other discussion. So let's talk about Cheryl Mills. So you've said earlier today that it really wasn't up to you to weigh in on whether there's a conflict for Ms. Mills to act as Secretary Clinton's lawyer in the interview. But again, you're kind of taking your attorney hat on and off whenever it's convenient. You decided that at the beginning of that interview it wasn't appropriate for you to weigh in as a lawyer suggesting there was a conflict, but then again, your recommendation is ultimately, as a lawyer, what's being done in this case. You see a little bit of inconsistency there, or no?
No, I see the point about the, look, I would rather not have an attorney hat on at any time. I put it on because I thought that was what was necessary at the conclusion of this investigation. But I stand by that. The agents of the FBI, it's not to them to try and kick out someone's lawyer.
What would have happened if you had said, Ms. Mills, because of the history here, you can't be in this interview?
I don't know. I don't know.
Could you have said that to her?
I guess you could. It would be well outside our normal role.
So a number of times today you've said there really is no double standard. And so now I'm just asking you as a citizen, and not even in your capacity as Director of FBI, can you sort of see why a lot of Americans are bothered by a perceived double standard? Because if any of the gentlemen sitting behind you this morning, I assume were with the department, had done some of the things Ms. Clinton did and told some of the lies that she told, you said in your statement that this is not to suggest under similar circumstances there wouldn't be consequences. In fact, they'd be subjected to administrative sanctions. And now we have an election going on where she's seeking a pretty big promotion. So maybe your point is she wouldn't be charged under similar facts, but can you sort of see why so many people are bothered by the facts in this case, given that really nothing happened to her and now she's running for President of the United States? I mean, can you see the optics on that are troubling?
Oh, I totally get that. That's one of the reasons I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can, because I get that question. But again, folks need to realize, in the FBI, if you did this, you'd be in huge trouble. I'm certain of that. You'd be disciplined in some serious way. You might be fired. I'm also certain you would not be prosecuted criminally on these facts.
And you've said that, and I appreciate that. Let me just ask one quick question because I'm out of time. But Mr. Bishop started to talk about this, and his district is affected as well in Michigan. But my district in southeast Michigan has the third largest settlement of Syrian refugees of any city in the country behind San Diego and Chicago. That's Troy, Michigan. And you said last fall in front of a Homeland Security Committee hearing that you really didn't have the data to properly vet the Syrian refugees that are trying to come in. And you said that again this morning. But, last weekend I'm at a grocery store and a Starbucks, and two different constituents walked up to me and said, can't you stop the President's resettlement of Syrian refugees in Detroit, Michigan? We're all afraid. And they're based on largely your comment that we don't have the database to really vet these folks. Anything I can tell the folks back in Michigan that we're doing other than all I say now is we just have to wait for a new president because this president has increased the number of refugees by 60% and 30% year over year the last 2 years. We just have to wait for a new president. I'd like to be able to say the FBI is doing something different than they were doing last year when you made those comments.
Well, as I said earlier, they can know that we are, if there is a whiff about this person, somewhere in the U.S. government's vast holdings, we will find it. And the second thing they can know is if we get a whiff about somebody once they're in, we're going to cover that in a pretty tight way. What I can't promise people is that if I can't query what's not in our holdings. That's the only reservation I offer to people.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Well, Director Comey, during questioning earlier, there was a dispute that arose over the contents of one or more of the immunity letters that were issued, particularly with regard to the issue of whether or not it contained immunity for destroying documents, emails. The individual who was questioning you about that was former Chairman Issa of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and I want him to be able to clarify because we have contacted the Department of Justice and asked them to read the immunity letters to us. So the gentleman is recognized briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be very brief. Under the immunity agreement with one or more individuals, we'll use Cheryl Mills as clearly one of the individuals. She negotiated a very, very good deal from what we can discover. She did not just receive immunity related to the production of the drive, the computer, and the contents, but in fact received immunity under 793, 18 U.S.C. 793 E and F, 1924 U.S.C. 1920, 18 U.S.C. 1924, and the so-called David Petraeus portion, 18 U.S.C. 2071. And I'll focus on 2071. Her immunity is against any and all taking, destruction, or even obstruction, the way we read it, of documents classified or unclassified. Now, the only question I have for you is, and I know you're going to put this to justice and we may have to ask them separately, for the purposes of what you needed as an investigator, because you were the person that wanted access to the computer, is that deal make any sense to, in return for things which she could have objected to as an attorney and held back, but which had no known proffer of leading to some criminal indictment of somebody else, she received complete immunity, as we read it, from obstruction or destruction of documents classified and unclassified, and that's based on a re-review of the immunity agreement.
Yeah, I think this is you're right. This is a question best addressed to Justice, but I think you're misunderstanding it. As I understand it, this was a promise in writing from the Department of Justice. If you give us the laptops, we will not use anything on the laptops directly against you in a prosecution for that list of offenses. It's not immunity for those offenses if there's some other evidence. Now, that said, I'm not exactly sure why her lawyer asked for it, because by that point in the investigation, we didn't have a case on her to begin with.
Well, I understand that, but based on the Reddit discovery and others, they asked me to do it, and you said so yourself, it was probably Cheryl Mill, they. You have an immune witness who has to tell you who they were. If they were told me to delete, and that's Cheryl Mills, then in fact you have evidence from an immune witness of a crime perpetrated by Cheryl Mills, the ordering of the destruction of any document, classified or unclassified, which clearly she seems to have done.
But she wouldn't be protected from that. If we developed evidence that she had obstructed justice in some fashion, all she's protected from is we can't use as evidence something that's on the laptop she gave us.
So
We
with
can
the
still prosecute her.
Right. So the information put into the record today, which included these Reddit discoveries, show that there is a they who asked to have the destruction of information under 18 U.S.C. 2071. If she doesn't have immunity for that order, she could, and by definition should be charged, because ordering somebody else to destroy something as an attorney well after there were subpoenas in place that were very specific, that's clearly a willful act, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman, would you yield?
Of course.
Your line of questioning, first let me show my cards. I believe that Cheryl Mills has an impeccable character, as my line of questioning suggested that Director Comey and his staff have impeccable character. But my good friend, there's immunity given. I don't think this applies to Ms. Mills, and I looked at the sections that you're speaking of. If you take local criminal and state actions given to the worst of characters for a variety of reasons, that was not the reason given to Ms. Mills. I am assured that it is a lawyer that was trying to be the most effective counsel to Ms. Mills as possible.
Well, reclaiming my time, the gentlelady's point may be true. I'm only speaking to the Director based on things were done that should not have been done. We now have evidence in front of this committee, in the record, of people destroying records of activities as late as a few days ago. So the fact that there still should be an open question, first of all, is could she be prosecuted? And if, in fact, they have told me to destroy this, under the exact same statute that included David Petraeus's, who was no longer on active duty, 18 U.S.C. 2071, there's at least a case to be made. Now, the problem we have is the lawyer negotiated a set of terms which hopefully doesn't mean that she gets a free pass, even if she willfully ordered the destruction of documents, which it does appear she did. And look, my job is not to be judge, jury, or hangman. My job is to look at what's been presented to us, ask the highest law enforcement officer in the land to, in fact, look into it, because it does appear as though it is there.
A brief yield, my good friend.
Of course.
Certainly, we have an oversight responsibility of the Director. I think he's been very forthright. But none of the actions of destruction can be attributed. I don't think we have anything in evidence to suggest that Ms. Mills contributed to the dictating or directing.
Well, the gentlelady may not have been.
Destruction.
The gentlelady may not have been here.
We can't speculate here.
The gentlelady may not have been here at the time, but the Director himself, when asked who would they would have been in that order to destroy, at least said it probably was or likely could have been Cheryl Mills. We're not saying it is. What we're saying is you have an immune witness.
The gentleman will suspend.
Of course.
The purpose of this was to set the record straight as to what the content of the document was. That has been accomplished, and the debate will continue on, but it will continue on outside of this hearing room.
And I would only ask,
speculate.
And I would only ask that the Director be able to review those documents of justice and follow up with the committee. Would be very helpful to all of us. I thank the Chairman.
The Director has answered in the affirmative that he will do that.
Yes, we'll follow up.
First of all, I want to thank Director Comey. We didn't make 4 hours and 40 minutes, but we did almost make 4 hours, and I know you have been generous with your time. However, I will also say that I think a lot of the questions here indicate a great deal of concern about the manner in which this investigation was conducted, how the conclusions were drawn, and the close proximity to that, and the meeting of the Attorney General with former President Clinton on a tarmac. At the same time, she then said, well, I'm going to recuse myself, and then shortly after that, you took over and announced your conclusions in this case, which are hotly disputed, as you can tell. The committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee have referred to the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of for the District of Columbia referral based upon her testimony before the Select Committee on Benghazi, suggesting that your statement at your press conference and your testimony before the Oversight and Government Reform Committee very clearly contradicted a number of statements she made under oath before that committee. And I want to stress to you how important I think it is that we made that referral for the purpose of making sure that no one is above the law. And in many cases regarding investigations, it is not just the underlying actions that are important, but they are the efforts of people to cover those up through perjury, through obstruction of justice, through destruction of documents. And so I would ask that this matter be taken very, very seriously as you pursue whatever actions the Department chooses to take, making sure that no one is above the law.
Thank you, sir.
With that, concludes today's hearing, and I thank our distinguished witnesses for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record, and the hearing is adjourned.
Oh.